in general, the engineering education has not evolved enough with times. The attempt with Plaksha is to create a truly world-class, forward-looking university.
Great universities are about building a great community, a great set of faculty, great academic partners, and a great set of people backing the project. Plaksha has all three of them.
This university will provide a world-class interdisciplinary education in science and technology.
Look at the impact the internet and smartphone have had on our lives. The impact of AI and machine learning in times to come is likely to be transformational.
At the end of the day, we are all designing for human beings. We are developing technology for human beings. That is why we are incorporating liberal arts into the curriculum at Plaksha.
At one end, you're doing AI and ML, and then you're looking at ethics and working environment, human psychology.
I think the way we've envisaged Plaksha is it's all about solving for world challenges.
Plaksha is defining a new model of engineering education. The curriculum at Plaksha will involve students to learn new age technologies along with the humanities and social sciences. And all this while also imparting leadership ability and developing their emotional quotient to inspire them to take on big challenges.
Given that we can start from scratch, we pretty much have lots of degrees of freedom.
We are trying to reimagine it in every way possible. Reimagine it in what we teach, how we teach, who we will hire as faculty.
How excited we are to partner with Plaksha to really think about a new model of engineering education, which is grand challenge focused.
India is going to be at the forefront of engineering education innovation into the future, and in that space, Plaksha is going to play a really key role.
So some of the founders at Plaksha have been involved in building Ashoka University, which within a short span of time has become the torchbearer of a liberal arts education in India. Hopefully, Plaksha will do the same in technology.
I believe that India has world-class students. Our vision is to provide the opportunity to build technological solutions for the future. This is why I'm involved in this project, a university for the future.
In general, the engineering education has not evolved enough with times. The attempt with Plaksha is to create a truly world-class, forward-looking university.
Great universities are about building a great community, a great set of faculty, great academic partners, and a great set of people backing the project. Plaksha has all three of them.
This university will provide a world-class interdisciplinary education in science and technology.
Look at the impact the internet and smartphone have had on our lives. The impact of AI and machine learning in times to come is likely to be transformational.
At the end of the day, we are all designing for human beings. We are developing technology for human beings. That is why we are incorporating liberal arts into the curriculum at Plaksha.
At one end, you're doing AI and ML, and then you're looking at ethics and working environment, human psychology.
I think the way we've envisaged Plaksha is it's all about solving for world challenges.
Plaksha is defining a new model of engineering education. The curriculum at Plaksha will involve students to learn new age technologies along with the humanities and social sciences. And all this while also imparting leadership ability and developing their emotional quotient to inspire them to take on big challenges.
Given that we can start from scratch, we pretty much have lots of degrees of freedom.
We are trying to reimagine it in every way possible. Reimagine it in what we teach, how we teach, who we will hire as faculty.
How excited we are to partner with Plaksha. Really think about a new model of engineering education, which is grand challenge focused.
India is going to be at the forefront of engineering education innovation into the future, and in that space, Plaksha is going to play a really key role.
So some of the founders at Plaksha have been involved in building Ashoka University, which within a short span of time has become the torchbearer of a liberal arts education in India. Hopefully, Plaksha will do the same in technology.
I believe that India has world-class students. Our vision is to provide the opportunity to build technological solutions for the future. This is why I'm involved in this project, a university for the future.
in general, the engineering education has not evolved enough with times. The attempt with Plaksha is to create a truly world-class, forward-looking university.
Great universities are about building a great community, a great set of faculty, great academic partners, and a great set of people backing the project. Plaksha has all three of them.
This university will provide a world-class interdisciplinary education in science and technology.
Look at the impact the internet and smartphone have had on our lives. The impact of AI and machine learning in times to come is likely to be transformational.
At the end of the day, we are all designing for human beings. We are developing technology for human beings. That is why we are incorporating liberal arts into the curriculum at Plaksha.
At one end, you're doing AI and ML, and then you're looking at ethics and working environment, human psychology.
I think the way we've envisaged Plaksha is it's all about solving for world challenges.
Plaksha is defining a new model of engineering education. The curriculum at Plaksha will involve students to learn new age technologies along with the humanities and social sciences. And all this while also imparting leadership ability and developing their emotional quotient to inspire them to take on big challenges.
Given that we can start from scratch, we pretty much have lots of degrees of freedom.
We are trying to reimagine it in every way possible. Reimagine it in what we teach, how we teach, who we will hire as faculty.
How excited we are to partner with Plaksha. Really think about a new model of engineering education, which is grand challenge focused.
India is going to be at the forefront of engineering education innovation into the future, and in that space, Plaksha is going to play a really key role.
So some of the founders at Plaksha have been involved in building Ashoka University, which within a short span of time has become the torchbearer of a liberal arts education in India. Hopefully, Plaksha will do the same in technology.
I believe that India has world-class students. Our vision is to provide the opportunity to build technological solutions for the future. This is why I'm involved in this project, a university for the future.
Welcome to Infinity 2020.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Infinity 2020. It's a real honor and pleasure to welcome you to Plaksha's inaugural tech conference. My name is Vineet Gupta. I'm an educator and an entrepreneur. I have been a founder and trustee at Ashoka University, which most of you are familiar with. I'm now involved in an effort to build Plaksha University, which aims to reimagine technology, education, and research in the 21st century. The new education policy, which was unveiled a few weeks ago, lays out a very ambitious goal in higher education for India. It aims to double the gross enrollment ratio in higher education to 50% from the current 25%. This means that India will need to more than double its capacity in higher education. India will need many more universities and many more universities of high quality. Plaksha is an attempt by 60 plus eminent academics and business leaders to reimagine technology, education, and research. It aims to create a new playbook
for engineering education in the 21st century. Some of you were watching the videos that were playing before we started. The campus is coming up in Chandigarh and we open in August 2021. So what should technology education in the 21st century look like? How will technology solve some of the biggest challenges that our planet faces? How do we create an ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurship? And how do students leverage an education in science and technology to build great careers? I'm sure these are questions in your mind. These are questions also in our mind. And Plaksha and Infinity 2020 aims to answer some of these questions over the course of the next 3 days. We have very exciting sessions and some great speakers. Speakers who are leaders driving change in education. Leaders who are thinking about tech education. Leaders who are thinking about solving some of the biggest challenges we face as a society. So 4 exciting sessions, Future of Tech Education, that happens today, starting in a couple of minutes from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. Tinker, Create, Solve. This is a session Saturday morning, 11 to 12:35. Tech Leaders for Tomorrow. What do careers in technology look like? Where are the best opportunities going to be? And lastly, on Sunday evening, we bring to you stories which inspire, stories of academics, of entrepreneurs, of leaders who have built some great organizations with their education in science and technology. Today's session really asks this fundamental question on what should engineering education in the 21st century of engineering disciplines. How do we nurture humane technologists? And above all, how will tech shape the future of education? Our first session today, we have a very exciting speaker. Joining me and delivering our opening keynote is Professor Mark Somerville. Mark is a leader driving change in tech education. He's the interim provost and the dean for faculty at Olin College of Engineering. Olin, in case some of you don't know, is a small college close to Boston, about 330 students. But within a short span of time, Olin has established itself as a leader in tech education. It was ranked number 3 in the US in technology education. And Mark, as Dean of Faculty and as the interim provost, has been a key part of Olin right from its inception. Mark has a PhD from MIT in electrical engineering. He also has an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering. He also has a degree in literature, an undergraduate degree in literature that I was unaware of, but I read today morning. I've had the honor and pleasure of spending time with Mark at the Olin campus, which I visited a few times. And as Plaksha is building its new campus, we are trying to learn and borrow from Olin as much as we can. Mark has also collaborated a lot with leaders, with institutions, particularly with Urbana-Champaign and TU Delft. And a whole new engineer, which is the title of the talk today, is actually a book that he co-authored with David Goldberg. And in the words of Tony Wayne, who's an eminent educator, far more than an inspiring story about the transformation of engineering education, this book serves as a call for action and blueprint for reinventing all education for the 21st century. So a real honor and pleasure to welcome Mark. Mark, over to you. And after you are done with your talk, I look forward to talking to you. Welcome.
Well, thanks so much. It's really exciting to be here, and I've got to tell you that watching the videos beforehand and seeing how much this project has made progress in the time since we visited when you were at Olin, it's super inspiring to see and really great to see that amount of progress. You know, I've been involved with lots of projects around the world over the years in the sort of space of trying to reinvent engineering education, and Plaksha is just blowing the doors off of it with regard to how quickly it's making progress and how inspiring the vision is. So I'm super happy to be here and really honored for the opportunity to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today, and I'm going to share some slides here about some lessons learned from the process of actually starting Olin College. So let me get that set up, and can I just confirm that we've got, can someone give me a thumbs up that you can see the slides right now? Are we good on that?
We can see it.
Okay, great. All right. So this is a talk that's mostly focused on Olin's experience. I think in many ways, Olin is kind of you could think of Olin as a US version of Plaksha. We started about 20 years ago, but the kinds of vision and challenges that we were responding to are pretty similar. And I think that we made plenty of mistakes along the way. And what I'm going to share with you is some of the insights from those mistakes along the way, with the hopes that maybe those will be helpful to Plaksha moving forward, and also helpful to all the students watching as they think about what actually matters in an education. So what I want to do today is talk to you about three, or share a set of stories that get at three key lessons. The first really key lesson is the importance of actually experimenting and iterating and learning by doing as a sort of key part of what education, and particularly engineering education, needs to take into account. This is something we've seen over and over again through the years at Olin, and I think it's something that seems to be very much built into the idea for Plaksha. A second key lesson that we've taken away, and that I know is very much being taken into account in the design of Plaksha, is the importance of not just thinking about education with regard to what you know, but thinking about education with regard to what you can do and who you are as a person. So actually thinking about the whole person in education, not just thinking about education as pouring knowledge into someone's head. And then underlying these two things is the extent to which I think a key lesson for us at Olin, and a key lesson that I see when I look at even the way that the buildings are designed at Plaksha, is the importance of thinking about not just curriculum, but thinking about what the culture of the institution is and how important that is in enabling the right kind of education. A little bit about Olin, just to provide a bit of context for my stories. Olin, the real origins of Olin are back in about 1995, when there were a lot of calls for change in engineering education in the US, and the Franklin W. Olin Foundation, which was a philanthropic foundation started by an entrepreneur, Franklin Olin, basically decided to take the entirety of its endowment and use it to start this new college, Olin College. Olin was started with a very particular mandate, and it was not just to prepare students to be engineering innovators, but it was also to be part of driving change in engineering education. And in many ways, the conversations that I've had the opportunity to be part of, whether around Plaksha or other projects around the world, has to do with that idea that Olin is trying to be part of a conversation around how might we shift engineering education and science and technology education in the kinds of directions that those of you that were listening to the video heard about. Over the course of the 20 years since we opened in 2002, we've been quite successful. We're pretty proud of some of the accomplishments that we've had. I think in similar ways, I think Ashoka in India has made a very rapid ascent. Olin is proud of its rapid ascent within the US. At this point, we have graduates in top PhD programs around the world, working in top companies and leading top companies around the world. Our graduates are very highly sought by employers, not just because they know stuff, but because they're able to come in and start producing value on the day that they walk in. Relatively speaking, Olin on a per capita basis has produced an enormous number of startups, and the institution is visited on a frequent basis by institutions from around the world. And that's all nice, but I actually think there's one rating that actually is the most meaningful rating for me, and this is for me coming at it from an instructor perspective. The Princeton Review in the US looks at lots of colleges and does ratings on all kinds of scales, right? From which ones have the best sports teams, to which ones have the best parties, to which ones have the most unhappy students, to which ones have the happiest students, and so on. And the two lists that Olin consistently shows up on are, first, the list of the top 10 hardest working students, right? And if you look at that list is all engineering schools, right? Engineering students work really hard, and they work really hard around the world. But the other list that Olin consistently shows up on is the top 10 happiest students list. That list is not one that typically is occupied by engineering schools. In fact, Olin's the only engineering school that consistently shows up on that list. And for me, as someone who cares about education, to have successfully built a curriculum and built a student experience in which students are both working incredibly hard and loving what they're doing, like that's the ultimate success, and that's the success I certainly wish for Plaksha as it moves forward. So let me shift to I'm going to tell a couple of stories. And the stories are some early Olin stories, and I'll share a little bit about what things look like today at Olin. So the first story is actually a story from the very beginning of Olin. This is a story about our first month of class. And a little bit you should know about this. We started Olin with a year of having a set of students come as partners to help us design the institution. And then in our very first year, you know, we admitted 75 students to be the very first, the inaugural class at Olin. This was 2002. And we were all really, really excited. I mean, there was 75 students who were getting to build Olin College, entirely new institution. It was super exciting. Faculty were excited. We had a great curriculum figured out. It was going to be awesome. And we got about 2 weeks into class, and it was a train wreck. It was a mess. Students were breaking down crying in class. They were saying, I can't do this. They were falling asleep in class. Faculty were strung out. Everything was just a mess. And it was a mess, you know, because I think the reality is that everyone's eyes were bigger than their stomachs in some sense. Everyone was trying to do more than they could. And so what we did is on a Friday, students walked into class and we handed students an envelope. And one student tells me that when she got that envelope, she thought, and she opened it, the envelope said, go down to the sports fields. And what she thought was, oh no, we're going to go down to the sports fields and they're going to make us do some impossible physics experiment that we're not going to understand at all. But they went down to the sports fields, and on the sports fields, we had set up music and a bouncy castle, a sort of fair where there was everything from dancing to students and faculty doing an egg toss that turned into a students throwing eggs at faculty and faculty throwing eggs at students kind of moment. So this particular picture is a faculty member and a student throwing eggs at each other. So we had this day of sort of blowing off steam. And then we got back together and said, listen, we screwed up. We all together, students, faculty, staff together, we tried to do more than we could to start with, and we need to reset. We need to admit that we've made a mistake here, and we need to ask, how can we begin again? And that was actually a really critical moment for us at Olin, because it was a moment of recognizing that actually you do make mistakes, but what you need to be willing to do is admit that you've made the mistakes and learn from the mistakes and create a culture and a community in which that learning from mistakes is a sort of key cornerstone. So today at Olin, we often talk about the need for a bouncy castle moment, because that's sort of a representation of this idea that it's important when things aren't working to step back and say, hey, that's not working. I'd imagine that Plaksha might have some of those kinds of moments along the way. And I hope that Plaksha and Plakshka's students are willing to sort of step back and say, hey, how can we help be a part of the solution here? Second story I want to tell you is a related story. This is 4 years later, right? So we went through that bouncy castle moment, and we had plenty more bouncy castle moments in the 4 years that followed. But we finally got to graduation, right? It's Olin's first graduation. And for the graduation, Olin students made t-shirts. And the t-shirts, on the front of the t-shirts, they said, Olin class of 2006, worst Olin education ever. And in many ways, that's true. Like if you think about it, every single class that those students took was the very first version of that class. Every single class that Olin students took, was a rough draft, right? That hadn't been made right. And so they experienced lots and lots of bumps along the way. But on the back of the t-shirts, it said Olin class of 2006, best Olin education ever. And honestly, that I think is a lot closer to the truth, because if you look at what those students are doing today, they are successful company founders, they are professors at top institutions across the US, they've gone on to incredible success. And when I ask them why they've gone on to that success, it is the learning that was involved in actually being part of building something. In some sense, those students all graduated with 4 years of real startup experience. And so that is, I think, an important lesson as well, that as much as the first beginnings of an institution are challenging, the first beginnings of an institution also provide an incredible learning opportunity that really is a once-in-a-lifetime learning opportunity for the students involved. So those are just a couple of stories that I think are helpful for an institution that's beginning. I want to share with you now a little bit about how we think about learning today at Olin. And first I'll share a few frameworks and then just one sort of example of that. So one framework that we talk about a lot is the idea that learning is not just about the stuff, right? It's not just about what you know as a student. It's about what you're able to do. Are you able to collaborate with others? Are you able to communicate effectively? Are you able to learn on your own? And are you the kind of curious person that goes on and continues to learn on your own? And not just what you can do, but more, who are you as a person? Are you the kind of person who can, pick yourself up after things go wrong? Are you the kind of person who steps into ambiguity and figures out how to address it? So that sort of idea that it's about the whole person is a pretty critical idea to us. A second really critical idea to us is the idea that actually learning is about trying things. And I've got a few examples of things that we actually say in various course descriptions, right? So these are various course descriptions at Olin, and you see the word experiment or experimental come up a lot, right? And in fact, this sort of second one, I think, captures something really important. Like many things at Olin, this is an experiment. It's possible that it will suck. And if it does, we'd like to hear about how it sucks, and we'd like to try together to make it suck less. I think that sort of idea that students are involved in making the place better leads to better educational outcomes, and also obviously leads to the place being better as well. So that's a big emphasis for us. A third emphasis for us is the idea that we build the curriculum around streams that develop sort of broad competencies as opposed to around disciplinary areas. So for example, we talk a lot about a design stream at Olin or an analysis stream at Olin, and those really form more of the backbone of our curriculum than, say, mechanical engineering or electrical engineering does. So one sort of concrete example of that is in design. We have a sort of framework of talking about design as being a process that starts with people and ends with people, right? At the end of the day, as an engineer, you're trying to address the needs of society. You need to understand the people that you're building things for, and you need to make sure those things are actually serving those people's needs. And that sort of philosophy and that framework forms the backbone for us in terms of what the experiences are that students have. So students will have experiences that actually address specific parts of this stream, and students have this framework in mind as they walk through their education. So for example, with regard to the design stream, one of the experiences that students have is an experience called Design Nature when they first walk in the door at Olin. That's one of their very first experiences, and that's an experience of going from a set of requirements to a set of specifications, right? It actually gets at that. It's not about mechanical design. It's not about anything other than that sort of process. They do some mechanical design along the way, but the objective is they learn about part of the process. Similarly, they, in their second year, have an experience called user-oriented collaborative design. Again, about the process, and particularly about the process of understanding the people that you're designing for. And by the time that they're seniors, they're engaged in the SCOPE program, which is a year-long program where they're working with a real industrial sponsor and solving real problems that start with people and end with people. So the sort of throughout the curriculum, this stream forms a sort of backbone for the students. If we sort of zoom down one level, I can tell you, I just want to give you one sort of example of how this maybe plays out in learning. And I'm going to give an example from the analysis stream. So this is a stream that's much more about how do I take some situation in the world and apply the kind of power tools of math and science to addressing that situation. So the example I'm going to tell you is an example that's in the first year. It's from a module that's about 4 weeks long. That's about how do you do boat design. And on the first day that students walk in, we give them a design task, right? They walk into class and we say, welcome to quantitative engineering analysis. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to build a boat. And the boat needs to do some particular things. It needs to float, it needs to carry a particular payload, and it also needs to have a particular angle of vanishing stability, right? They don't know what an angle of vanishing stability is, so they have to look it up. They have to look up all kinds of stuff about how boats work and so on. They try to make sense of it. They also think it's really easy, and then they go out and they test their boats, and the picture on the right shows you what happens. Basically, none of the boats succeed. And none of the boats succeed because actually the task we've given them is a task that requires analysis to do properly. They then spend a lot of time saying, okay, why did that not work? How do we understand the requirements for that thing? And what are the learning goals that we need to achieve in order to meet those requirements? And then over the course of those following 4 weeks, they dig deep into lots of content knowledge. But that content knowledge is not just content knowledge for content's sake. That content knowledge is actually about them making sense of something. They already have an intuitive understanding of why it's important. They understand what the relations are between the ideas, and they can actually make sense of that. And the role of faculty in this is to act as coaches and as resources as students trying to make sense of this. And then finally, on the last day, they basically are repeating the task that they've done, but repeating the task that they were given at the beginning with the full sort of set of power tools at their disposal. And when they put those boats in the water, those boats actually perform in the way that they are designed to perform, and perform that way based on having actually applied those power tools of math and science. And finally, they actually have to do a sort of full technical write-up of that basically shows that they've integrated all of those sort of technical ideas into this thing that started out with them failing. At the end of this process, one of the really exciting things for me is that you see students becoming much more aware of the process of doing analysis. And I think that's one of the things that we're really interested in, is not just that students can do analysis or students can do design, but that they have a sort of metacognitive awareness of what that process is and how they approach that process. So those are some examples from Olin, both some stories from Olin's early days and one concrete example from how we teach today at Olin. And I want to end by sharing a few things that I think are lessons that you can take away from that. One lesson, that I emphasized at the beginning is the idea that fundamentally experimenting and trying things again and learning by doing and actually learning by making mistakes is a really key thing to do. I think it's often the case in education that we focus on getting it right, but in fact, getting it wrong and then asking, why did I get it wrong, is often a much more valuable way to approach education. And that applies at multiple levels, whether you talk about within an individual course, whether you talk about what students do, whether you talk about how you think about the curriculum, or whether you talk about how you work as an institution. The idea that you should always be iterating and trying to improve and experimenting and saying, hey, that didn't work, is, I think, a really important idea. A second really important idea is this idea of whole person education, right? That it's not just that a student knows vector calculus, it's the idea that a student actually understands why they might want to use vector calculus, that they can apply vector calculus to something, and that they feel confident enough and curious enough to choose to do so. So that sort of idea of thinking about education as being about a person, as opposed to thinking about education as transferring knowledge into a knowledge vessel called a brain, that's, I think, a really important idea. And that idea, I think, is very much reflected in the ways that we think about the education as starting with people, starting with what the purpose of the education is, starting with the kinds of processes that we go through, as opposed to purely focusing on disciplinary knowledge. And then the final thing that I think underlies both of these is the idea that as you build an education and as you build an institution, you want to think not about just what do you do, you want to think about what is the actual culture that you're building, and particularly what are the assumptions that underlie that culture. So there's a framework for culture that's very common in anthropology, but Edgar Schein is kind of one of the people who talks about it a lot, that says there are 3 levels of culture. There's the stuff you see, right? The sort of artifacts, the top of the iceberg that's visible. So that's what the classes are, what the buildings look like or whatever. There are the reasons that people give you for those things, the sort of espoused values. But then there's the stuff that's deep underneath that people often don't even recognize, but they're the sort of underlying assumptions about the way that the world works and underlying assumptions about education. And I'd like you to think about the kinds of stories that I've just told you. And I want to share with you some of my reflections about what I think some underlying assumptions are. I think one underlying assumption in these stories is the idea that students can be trusted. I mean, think about it. We invited a set of 30 high school students to come and help us build the institution. We were willing to admit to that set of students, hey, we screwed up. We need to figure it out together. So the sort of idea that students can be trusted, I think is a really important one when you talk about whole person education. Related to that is the sort of idea of openness. That is the idea that both as a student and as a faculty member, it's okay to say, I don't know. As a student and a faculty member, it's about forming a relationship. It's not just about a sort of transactional interaction. And related to that is the idea that actually education is not an individual process, it is a community process. And thinking about it as something that's about connecting with other people is really important. And finally, this coming back to the thing that I started with talking about happiest students, education should be fun. It should bring us joy. It should bring students joy. If we're creating an education that is 4 years of pain, we're doing everyone a disservice. And so joy really should be an underlying value. So, I'll acknowledge, this, I'm an engineer and I'm talking to you about joy and connection and trust. Those don't sound like things that engineers talk about very much. It sounds pretty touchy-feely and squishy, but I do want to assure you that if you actually look at the literature, those things are things that support intrinsic motivation in students. Those things are things that develop growth mindset in students. Those things are things that lead to students being creative. Those things are things that lead to students being entrepreneurial. Those things are things that lead to students being much better thinkers. So as squishy as it sounds, I think it's really important. And as squishy as it sounds, I think the reality is that when you look around education today, trust is not something that we've got built in, right? The underlying assumption in education in general is we don't trust students with anything. Openness is not something that we've got built into education. When professors are at the board, how often do they try to find some way to cover up the fact that they made a mistake as opposed to admitting that they made a mistake? Connection is not something we've got built in. Often education is built around the idea of, you're going to beat the person around you, look to your left, look to your right, 2 of the 3 of you won't be here in 4 years. And education is not something that's always focused on joy. It's often the case that we frame an engineering education as 4 years of pain that you need to get through. So I think these are really important things for us to reflect on and think about. And I know there are things that Plaksha is thinking about as it moves forward. So I'll end with a quote from the former president of MIT, Charles Vest, who passed away a few years ago. His observation was that making universities and engineering schools exciting, creative, adventurous, rigorous, demanding, and empowering milieus is way more important than specifying curricular details. I couldn't agree more with Charles Vest, and I certainly know that that's what Plaksha is going to be thinking about, and I'm excited to see where Plaksha goes. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I don't know if we have time for questions, but that's where my presentation ends.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, we do have time for questions till about another 15 minutes, if that's good with you. Well, thank you. And it was, I've sort of heard this story a number of times, but it's always great to hear it again. And I think every time you hear it, there are more lessons on how education should be delivered and how particularly engineering education should be delivered. So let me ask this first question, which came up with from Ravi, one of our students. Ravi is saying, Mark, if you had to develop a sort of a similar experience in the virtual world, considering that students are now learning virtually for the last 6 months, what would you do and how would you design that?
Well, first of all, I think that's a fascinating question, and it's one that that I think lots of people are thinking about. So I guess the first thing I would say is kind of the thing I always tell people to say, which is I don't know. I'm not sure. I think there are. I will observe first that digital natives are much better at connection in the virtual world than folks of my generation are, right? And so I think when I I was talking to a junior faculty member last night about the work that he's doing right now, using for example Discord in instruction, right, which is a platform that mostly, those of you, the students at least probably know, that's mostly a platform that's used for gamers, but it's one that actually has really great affordances for sort of connection. So I guess I would maybe say that in general, I think it has been the case that online education has focused on the knowledge transfer component of education. It has not asked the question, how do we build whole person education in the online world? I think it's a really important question to ask. I think looking at spaces that are outside of education to ask how might we create experiences that are more aligned with this educational philosophy, how might we create connection that's more aligned with that educational philosophy, those feel like the places that I would look, but I don't have a great answer for that. It's a super interesting question.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, a couple of questions I think are related to what you were talking about. The first one, this one coming from Manjula, who's asking, are many faculty members ready for this kind of shift in technology education? I mean, the sort of education you spoke of. And how does one select and prepare faculty?
Yeah, so I think the short answer is no. Many faculty members are not ready for this kind of shift. I think it's actually a very challenging shift for lots of faculty members to make. And it's challenging because of cultural reasons, right? If you think about what it is to do a PhD, right? Often doing a PhD is mostly about you as an individual being successful. It's very much about acquisition of knowledge. And then it's in a culture in which often it's the case that admitting that you're wrong is sort of the last thing that you do. So I think a lot of the sort of assumptions that are built into higher education more broadly are assumptions that are counter to the ones that I talked about. So I think it's hard. It's a hard shift to make, and it's one that I think is quite hard to impose on a faculty member. I think it's important, given that you actually are very intentional in your hiring of faculty members, that you think about not just where did this person get their degree and what's the subject that they do and how good were their teaching ratings or whatever, or how much money can they bring in from grants. But you also think about, how open is this person? How flexible is this person? So for example, at Olin, we've actually shifted our hiring process to one that brings in multiple faculty at the same time. We ask those faculty to work on teams. We ask those faculty to do design exercises with students. And the reason that we're doing that is that we're both trying to help those faculty understand what the culture is at Olin so that they can make an informed choice about whether it's the right place for them. But we're also using it as a way to understand, is this someone who maybe hasn't been in this kind of environment before, but is at least intrigued by these values and wants to explore it. So I think making these values part of your hiring process, making these values part of your evaluation process is really, really, really important. Because if you don't do that, the status quo, the sort of values that are dominant within the status quo will win out.
Got it. That's wonderfully said, Mark. I'm assuming students sort of adjust to this environment well, but Kumkum is asking still, how do students adjust to this sort of a learning environment? And related, how do you evaluate and test students? And, higher education has often sort of prided itself in the sort of grades it gives, GPAs of students coming out.
Yep.
And does that correlate with their success in career? So this whole performance of students, their adjustment, and also their evaluation.
Yeah, so two really interesting questions. The first, with regard to students adapting to this. My experience is that students do adapt to this much more easily than faculty do in general. That's not surprising. Students are younger, they're sort of still developing and growing and deciding who they are. And so adjusting to a new environment is a little bit easier for them to do, I would say. Our experience is that it takes sort of half a semester or so for a student to kind of get it, that the rules are different in this environment. And that's true whether it's a student who is coming to Olin as a first-year student or a student who is visiting us as an exchange student from another part of the world. So I mean, one thing I would comment on that is I often hear the idea that these ideas only apply within certain cultures. And I guess my experience is these are pretty human ideas, and they apply kind of across the world. The question with regard to evaluation is a really interesting one. I guess I'd say first that my opinion is that the ways that we have traditionally evaluated students are not particularly useful for anyone, right? They're not useful for students in terms of understanding their own learning, right? What does it actually mean that I got to be in that class, and how do I actually, what actions can I take as a consequence of that? And they're also not particularly predictive of success in the world, right? We all know lots of stories about the person who started the big company who had a D average or who dropped out of college. And we also know lots of people who had really high grade point averages who've sort of gotten stuck because even though they have a bunch of knowledge in their heads, who they are as people and what their ability is to do things is limited. So I think one part of evaluation has to be asking the question, what is evaluation about? Is it about formative assessment that's to enable the student to get better? Is it about informing some outside person about what the student is capable of? Is it, is it about trying to figure out who's better and who's worse? I think being clear about what the purpose of the assessment is critical, and then making appropriate choices about how you're going to assess based on those purposes. So I think one of the really critical things that technology enables now is that it's much easier for a student today to actually not say what they can do, but show what they can do, right? Most of our students are graduating, with portfolios of 20 to 30 different project examples with concrete artifacts that they designed, with concrete reports that they've written. And that is much more meaningful to an employer for demonstrating potential than whether someone got an A or a B in class X.
Right. So this one comes from Ganesh, which is also a question which has been on my mind map for a long time. Is it possible to deliver the old type of scale like India? And
I'm sorry, you broke up and I missed the question. Could you ask again?
Is it possible to deliver the Olin type of education at scale in a large country like India? If not, what are the changes that existing engineering colleges can bring to have joy return to learning?
Yeah, so I think this is a question we get all the time at Olin, because Olin is incredibly small. And frankly, the things that Olin does are things that make sense at the scale that Olin works at and with the students that Olin has. So I would never tell someone, oh, you should do this thing that Olin does. Like I think the idea that Olin would export specific chunks of curriculum doesn't make very much sense, because curriculum is situated within a given set of resource constraints within a given environment. I think on the other hand, that the values that I'm talking about are values that you can make sense of and apply at any scale and with any level of resource constraints. And some concrete examples of that I would point to are, first, we've worked with the University of Texas at El Paso, for example, right? So UT El Paso is a large state institution in the US. It primarily serves first-generation college students. And they were developing a new engineering program there, and they're much more resource constrained than Olin is. And they were developing a new engineering program, and we partnered with them to ask questions about how that might work. I think we learned as much from partnering with them as they learned from us. What they ended up coming up with is not something that looks exactly like Olin, but it is something that instantiates the values, and you see that in the joy that the students have. You see that in the ways that the students engage in trying to build and improve the program. So I think focusing on curriculum is not the right place to focus. I think focusing on culture is the right place to focus, and then asking how do I use those as design principles within my environment.
Great. I think that's again an important lesson, Mark. I'm just wondering, and this is coming out of how important was all this? Was your literature background in all of this?
I think something that was actually quite important to me. So first of all, knowing about William Faulkner or reader response theory was not very helpful. On the other hand, having had the experience of sitting in a classroom in an English seminar, and at the same time sitting in a circuits lecture, and contrasting the ways in which faculty engaged in those different environments and the ways in which students engaged in those different environments, that was quite informative, because I think there's a lot to learn from. So first of all, in terms of just my thinking about education, I think there's a lot to learn from looking at the liberal arts tradition with regard to how people in the liberal arts tradition think about what education is. So that's the first thing I would say. Certainly, developing the ability to write is something that I did a whole lot more in my literature studies than I did in my engineering studies, and that has served me well. Having perspectives about different people's experiences in the world, that has served me well. So the sort of more of the meta level stuff has been incredibly valuable. The details of 18th century satirists, not very important really.
Excellent. So maybe the last question, Mark. How does an engineer from Olin differ from an engineer, non-Olin engineer? Let me put it like that.
So I think first of all, engineers from Olin are really, really good at working on teams and identifying what's important and communicating with, whether it's with people who are technical or people who are non-technical. And that's something I hear from my graduates all the time, is how they're on this team and they can't believe that no one else on the team knows that teams need to do X, Y, and Z to be successful, and no one on the team can put together a presentation to save their lives and so on. So I think that's one important difference. I think a second difference with some programs certainly is the extent to which there's sort of excitement about engineering and excitement about learning. I think that it's often the case that traditional education kind of beats the joy out of students. Like, it's like, okay, I got through this, great. Now I can get a job, I'm done, right? and that's sad. That's sad when we do that to students. I think we're pretty successful at Olin at not doing that to students. I think it is the case that we make trade-offs in our program. Olin students have less exposure to various specific technical topics. And so one of the things we hear from our students when they go to graduate school is they'll write back and say, I can't believe you didn't teach me this subject. And we're like, yeah, we didn't teach you that subject. I guess you're going to have to learn it yourself. And lo and behold, they do learn it themselves, and they take their qualifying exams and they do fine. And 6 months later, they're doing research and they write back and they say, yeah, that wasn't so hard, and now I'm doing great on this research stuff. But there's definitely a compromise with regard to content knowledge.
Well, thanks, Mark. This has been wonderful. Any closing comments you'd like to make just before you end?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this. It's a wonderful project. It's really exciting. I am really jealous of all of you getting to do the startup. Those of you that have been involved in Ashoka and then in this, like, wow, what a privilege to be involved in building two great universities. So the best of luck to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. Really delighted. I know you had a really, really busy day today, but you took out time to be with us. And I do hope you can visit Plaksha when we open.
I would love to. When the pandemic is over, I am looking forward to getting over to Plaksha and seeing you. So,
well, thank you, Mark. And
great to talk to you all. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's the end of our first session. A great start to the conference. And I think a very apt speaker. I'm now going to hand over the rest of the day's proceedings to my colleague Pallavi, who's been part of the Plaksha team. Pallavi is a graduate in economics and then did his MBA at IIM Bangalore. She works for the Boston Consulting Group, but has been seconded to the Plaksha project for the last 3 years. So over to you, Pallavi, for the rest of the evening. And thank you. Goodbye. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you so much, Vineet, for being a wonderful host. Hi, everyone. My name is Pallavi, and I'm going to be the MC for the rest of the evening. I'd also like to take this opportunity to, call out our student organizing committee that's played, an important role in this conference. And to the point that Mark was making earlier around students really being involved in setting up the institute, I hope that we epitomize those values from the beginning as well. Before we move on to the next session, here's a poll for the audience. It's almost to test how closely you were listening to the previous session. So the question is up on your screen. What, according to you, will be critical in reinventing technology education? There are 4 choices here. We'll keep this open for 30 seconds. All right, that's okay, awesome. So the highest number of votes have gone to culture, 56%. And that's exactly what Mark was talking about. So full marks to the audience. You were really listening carefully. Thank you so much for being so enthusiastic. Thank you for your wonderful questions. And with this, we'll move on to the next session. The session is called Breaking the Boundaries of Engineering Education. In this session, which is structured as a panel discussion, we'll get an insider's view from academic leaders on why dismantling the walls between different engineering disciplines is important and how that really plays out in the classroom in some incredible universities around the world. This panel is going to be hosted by Mr. Nitin Malhan. Nitin studied computer science at IIT Delhi and MBA at IIM Ahmedabad. He worked at McKinsey and Company after that, and thereafter joined Warburg Pincus, where he went on to be the managing director and co-head for India. Now he started his own firm, New Market Advisors, of which he is the founding and managing partner. Nitin is also a founder and trustee of the upcoming Plaksha University. Over to you, Nitin. Thank you so much for your time. You can go ahead and introduce the panel.
Sure. Thank you, Pallavi, and very warm welcome to everyone on the session. As you know, this session is titled Breaking the Boundaries of Engineering Education. And firstly, for those of you who joined expecting to see Neeraj Agarwal, my apologies. There was a change in schedule and we had to swap our sessions. And while I can't deliver Neeraj, I will try and get close. Most of us have heard about liberal arts framework as one of the models of imparting education that is more holistic, that combines elements of natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, and really brings context to education. That concept has been around for a number of years or decades and is well accepted, well understood. What we want to explore in this session is really applying the concept of an interdisciplinary approach within engineering education. This is one of the ideas and principles that is core to what we are trying at Plaksha. And hopefully in this session, we can give you a little bit of background by what is meant by it, how does it really manifest itself in the classroom, why is it relevant in the world today, and what are the trade-offs, if any. And I'm really excited to be joined by 3 very distinguished academicians to talk more about this theme. Pallavi, maybe we can get the videos on. Hi, Arvind. Let me start by introducing Dr. Arvind Raman. Arvind is the Robert B. Adams Professor in Mechanical Engineering at Purdue University. He is also the Executive Associate Dean to the Faculty and Staff and Professor of Materials Engineering. So clearly wearing many hats already. He's also an alumnus of my alma mater, IIT Delhi, and went on to study masters at Purdue and then got his PhD from UC Berkeley. Thanks, Arvind, and welcome. Dr. Keith Buffington is a professor of mechanical engineering at Bucknell University and is also the former dean of engineering at Bucknell. Among his many achievements in areas of interest are innovation and entrepreneurship, where he's done a lot of work in how to build that ecosystem in the context of Bucknell. Keith studied at Tufts for his undergraduate and then did his master's and PhD at Stanford. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
And we have Dr. Uday Desai, who is the founding director. Sorry, is Dr. Desai's screen on?
Nitin, Dr. Desai is just joining us. He's facing some internet issues. He'll be here.
Okay, so I will maybe just introduce him and hopefully he will join us momentarily. Dr. Desai is the founding director of IIT Hyderabad, with which he was associated until 2019. And at present, he continues to be Professor Emeritus at IIT Hyderabad. He's also an advisor and mentor to several institutions in India and overseas, and has played an integral role in institution building in many of these places. Dr. Desai received his undergraduate degree in electrical engineering at IIT Kanpur and did his master's at the State University of New York, Buffalo, followed by his PhD from the Johns Hopkins University, all in electrical engineering. So welcome to all of you. And to kick off this session, maybe I'll start with you, Arvind, and really ask you to share your interpretation of what is this interdisciplinary approach in engineering education. What does it really mean and how does it come to life?
First of all, good evening, Nitin, and thanks to the entire Plaksha team for organizing this Infinity event and this panel. And a hi to Keith and Uday. It's nice to have a chance to be with all of you virtually here. I think interdisciplinarity in the context of engineering education generally speaks to something that we've all known as traditional engineering education. When people graduate from traditional engineering and go to a real life situation, they know that any significant progress that has to be made in any real life engineering, in any real life problem that engineers get engaged in, requires really an interdisciplinary mindset. What that means is you're always typically working in teams, people from very different backgrounds, and not just different kinds of engineering, but you're going to be dealing with people who are in customer service. You're dealing with people in marketing. You're dealing with people with a sociology background, people, teachers, educators. Depends on who the customers are, who the people you're trying to serve with that product. What comes of that team, and I include the beneficiaries when I talk of the team, I include the beneficiaries of the service or product. What ends up happening is the streams of multiple disciplines kind of come together and a common shared understanding emerges on the needs. And there are these interfaces that people start learning a little more and start their positions, their understanding starts changing from what they usually had. It's that shared understanding that comes from people from different disciplines together to solve problems. That is the characteristic of interdisciplinary mindset in engineering. The challenge and the big question is, can you be intentional about getting people ready for that before they go to the workplace? And that's what we're going to be talking about hopefully today. Over.
Right. Before we get to that though, Arvind, maybe I can switch to you, Keith, and welcome Dr. Desai. We missed you for a few minutes, but we introduced you.
No problem. Thank you. Yeah.
And, to your point, Arvind, this is about sort of getting different mindsets together. And I'm curious, before we talk of some of the issues you raised, if maybe Keith, you can talk a little bit about from a student perspective in a classroom, what does it really mean? We've sort of all grown up, at least in our generation, being electrical engineers or computer scientists or mechanical engineers. What does this new world look like in the classroom? Is it very different or is it more of the same but sort of nuanced on the edges?
Yeah, thank you, Nitin. And thank you for having me as part of this panel. I'm looking forward to the conversation and looking forward to the questions from all of the participants. So I would like to echo what Arvind said. I think that interdisciplinarity is the way that engineering is done in the world and in the industrial world in particular. And the question is, how can we prepare students to do that? And to your question, I think there are lots of ways that we can engage students to make sure that they have the experience, at least part of that experience while they're undergraduates. Here at Bucknell, we're a relatively small school, so building on what Mark Somerville was saying, some of these things scale readily, some of them not so much. We actually have a fair amount in common with Olin. But we try to engage our students as early as possible with the idea that they should be thinking broadly, that engineering is not just a very narrow discipline that they have to somehow master and survive, that really engineering is serving the public good. It's about creating value. It's about thinking about how to learn about a new subject and apply it in new areas. And it's about working in teams and working with others. So we have examples here at Bucknell. As was mentioned before, I'm former Dean of Engineering, but I am now pretty much 100% back in the classroom. So I teach a freshman seminar where students are focusing on the grand challenges of engineering and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That in and of itself opens up the students' minds to the fact that there are big problems that aren't just solved by technical expertise. And they, I think, gain a little bit of an awareness or a little bit of a change of perspective on what it means to be an engineer. We try to reinforce that throughout our curricula. We do that in a variety of ways. Design projects seem to be a good way to do that. Working with different constituencies is a good way to do that. And we are an engineering college embedded in a liberal arts institution, so we have a little bit of an advantage in the fact that the students and the faculty that our engineering students are experiencing are actually fairly broad in terms of disciplines and expertise. One of the things that we do that I think is particularly impactful is we provide a capstone experience, a cumulative experience for our students, interdisciplinary senior design experience, where we very intentionally bring students together from different disciplines to work with an industrial sponsor on a real problem. And it's not a problem that's defined by the sponsor and it's like, go figure this out. It's a problem where we don't know how to figure this out. We don't quite know where the value to our company is in this problem, but we want this group of interdisciplinary students from different engineering disciplines, and we also try to bring in some management students as well, to focus on that so that they can get different perspectives on the problem, make sure that they're addressing the problem in a valuable way to the company, and then dive deeply into some of the technical aspects in creating a prototype and testing it and making sure that it really does function in the way that we would like it to, the company would like it to, and adds value. I noticed there was a question as part of Mark's session, which is like, what is the perfect engineer? That's a really tough one to answer, but I think part of what we're trying to achieve is the T-shaped engineer. That's a concept that many of you may have heard before. It's not a new one, but the idea is that you're trying to create an engineer that is T-shaped in terms of their breadth and their expertise. They have deep technical knowledge, probably in a particular area, but they also have the breadth of thinking and the capability of learning new ideas, again, as Mark was saying, that allows them to apply their deep technical skills to broad problems. And I think that's essential in what we're trying to do with our engineers today.
We'll, Keith, come back on this notion of the T. I do want to delve on that a little bit because that's kind of one of the core debates here about breadth versus depth. But before that, maybe I can pull in Dr. Desai as well to maybe share the Indian experience a little bit of, you know, what is happening on this interdisciplinary approach in institutions in India that you may be seeing within the engineering discipline.
Well, what I would say today, I mean, it's an in thing. Everybody talks about interdisciplinarity. And I mean, nobody will contest that particular concept. And whoever you talk to will say that, yes, I am involved with some form or the other interdisciplinary education. Okay. The issue is at the ground level, how much of it really is there? Sometimes I think, you know, there is such a subtle difference between interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity. Okay, so we do have multidisciplinary education system that is fairly active. Okay, so in some sense, multidisciplinary to me is that, okay, if I'm an electrical engineer, I take courses in electrical engineering, and if I like something, I will maybe take courses in humanities or economics or maybe in physics, etc. You know, so to me that is like multidisciplinarity. But the point is that do we have a curriculum which in some sense integrates different disciplines together? To me, that is interdisciplinarity. I mean, one area I can kind of describe where that's how it emerged. In fact, it was born that way, is biomedical engineering. If you look at biomedical engineering, and it was naturally born as an interdisciplinary subject or a program, because there were electrical engineers, there were mechanical engineers, there were material science people, There were people with biology backgrounds coming into picture. There were medical community which were involved. But on the other hand, the traditional disciplines like electrical, mechanical, chemical, to an extent, even computer science, though computer science is becoming a little more pervasive because everybody needs some kind of coding, some AI applications, etc. Okay. I think reality, we need to work hard. So my feeling is that, to me, if you ask me, and that's why I like the topic of this particular panel discussion, is breaking the engineering barriers. The point is not just breaking barriers. I think we need to essentially break the mold and redesign the whole thing from scratch. Because as long as the mold is still there, what we will do is we'll keep mixing things here and there. Because see, each one, I mean, we are human beings, right? I want to protect my territory. Okay, I do not want to lose my identity as an electrical engineer, or within electrical engineering, I don't want to lose my identity as a communication engineer or signal processing person. That's where that's what defined me. That's what the community has given me a lot of credit for, and this happens in every discipline. So I will talk about interdisciplinarity as long as it does not affect my identity. Okay, moment it starts impinging on my identity, I will start sort of compromising. Not that I will disagree. Okay, so I think something that happened in biomedical is perhaps what is required for the whole engineering discipline by itself, which is easily said, but it's a Herculean task in my opinion.
Arvind or Keith, any of you guys want to take on this theme that Dr. Desai introduced, which is sort of breaking the silos and making it happen, which is as much of a supply side issue from the schools and the faculty and the sort of established tenure as it may be on the student side, and how are places attempting that you've seen do well?
Yeah, I'm happy to add a little bit to that. I think it is difficult, as Mark was saying, it's all about culture, and it's hard to change culture. There's certainly fiefdoms and turf wars that go on between different departments, and it has to do with identity. I think that's very, very true. Part of the change in culture is educating a new generation of engineers so that they are more amenable to the changes that must be made. But I think that's too slow. I mean, so the next generation of faculty in engineering that may be in school right now, they're going to be professors in 10 years, and then they're going to last for another 30 or 40 years after that. So we need to be able to somehow accelerate that change. And I think conversations like this certainly help, where we're identifying the issues so that we're bringing them to the surface so we can start talking about them and wrestling with them a little bit and hopefully feeling less threatened to our own identities. But there are also very specific programs. One that Bucknell has engaged in and actually just received some significant funding from the National Science Foundation is revolutionizing engineering departments, RED grants from the National Science Foundation in the US, where the purpose is to really create major cultural change and relatively quickly, and then to disseminate new ideas to other institutions so that they can learn and try those as well. Olin is another, of course, example of this. That's their mission, is to keep reinventing themselves every year and then disseminating the results of their experiments in engineering education to the rest of the world.
One of the things I forgot to mention in Arvind's introduction is that we are also privileged to have him as a member of the advisory board at Plaksha, and he's been integral in the thinking behind the programs. And Pallavi, if we could actually put up the chart which has the 4 undergraduate programs that Plaksha is starting off with next year, that may be an interesting way to sort of start talking about this question of breaking the boundaries. Because interestingly, to the point that Dr. Desai was making, one of the things that is being attempted at Plaksha is really designing, and we have the luxury since we are starting fresh, is to really start with programs that at their core and design itself have multidisciplinarity. So, we're not launching with programs in computer science and civil and mechanical engineering, but these are sort of the 4 majors that are being launched next year as the school starts, which is computer science and AI, robotics and cyber physical, which is electrical, mechanical, autonomous systems. There's the whole biological systems engineering that you were mentioning, Dr. Desai. And then there is a data science, business, and economics theme. Maybe Arvind, since you've been involved with some of this as well, you might want to talk a little bit about, using this opportunity as we are building ground up to try and address some of those challenges and, what the learnings might be given what you've seen.
Yeah, no, glad to. Thanks, Nathan. So I think what's exciting about what Plaksha's vision for learning and teaching is, I mean, there's two sides to this. One is the curricular piece, which you see here, and what it's going to do is it's going to require faculty from very different disciplines to come and teach major. You can imagine people who'll be teaching robotics and cyber physical systems probably themselves did PhD in 3 different disciplines, at least. In the data science, business, and economics, maybe people who did PhD in 4 different disciplines have to come together, right? So right away, it is forging that common shared understanding, right, which I talked about, is really what interdisciplinarity is about amongst the faculty teaching these things. And of course, once you reorganize things like this, there's always the danger that they'll become their own silos, right, in the future. These could become disciplines, long term on their own. So the other thing that Plaksha does is really building this DNA of interdisciplinarity through a vertically integrated hands-on experiential learning, right? So it goes through all 4 years. It is sort of based on Olin's model combined with EPICS, which is the Engineering Projects and Community Service here. That's there all over the world, but we started it here at Purdue, and so have had a chance to learn a lot from past mistakes and how to do it well, etc. And the vertically integrated projects, right? And then we're combining into it what UC Berkeley has been doing with the grand challenges, which is kind of similar to what Keith was talking about in Bucknell, but a focus on grand challenges and SDGs and so on. The idea is that right from year 1 all the way through their final year, they're working in teams that intentionally target these challenge problems. And these challenge problems will require, you have to bring all students from all these disciplines together. You got to bring in beneficiary groups who you're adding value to, who you're creating value for, whether it's industry, whether it's community you're working with, whatever it is. You have to work with sociologists, and put the whole thing together, and you're doing it over year after year after year. It is a requirement. It's embedded through hands-on experiential learning. Multidisciplinarity is always going to be a backbone of the Plaksha learning experience. So I'm kind of happy about this two-way approach to it. The curricular piece itself forces faculty from different disciplines to come in together, and then there is this vertically integrated experiential learning, intentionally building an interdisciplinary mindset to solving real-life challenges. Over.
You raise an interesting point, Arvind, which is that one of the challenges in this is to ensure that disciplines like these don't become their own silos over time, that there is truly in the DNA of the place the ability to keep moving the blocks, if you will, as the demands and the requirements of the world keep changing and the grand challenges keep changing. And it's obviously easier said than done, as we all know, because we all like our comfort zones, we all like our kingdoms and turfs. But in some ways, that's sort of the design principle. I want to get back to the point that Keith, you had made about the T-shaped approach. And one of the pushbacks sometimes when you have this discussion around the true ground-up design interdisciplinary approach is the notion of, are you losing on the rigor or the depth that the traditional model has? And I'm curious, and maybe for all of you, how does one create that balance, particularly when you are approaching it like at Plaksha ground up with these programs that are, by design interdisciplinary. So you're almost starting with orienting towards a world problem or a world situation or a challenge that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that's an ongoing debate in some sense. I think different institutions would find the right balance at different points. Mark was talking about that at Olin, and he gets feedback from some of their alumni that maybe they didn't quite get all of whatever bits and pieces of a certain discipline or certain foundation that they might have liked, maybe, or maybe they wouldn't have liked it at the time, but maybe if needed at some point in their future. I think the key is that you're really teaching students to learn. If you can embed that fundamental ability in what they're doing and give them enough understanding of the technical aspects as well as broadening aspects, I think they'll be well situated for their future. But there is a reality, and how do you structure a curriculum that allows you to do that? There has to be some fundamentals. You can't give students infinite amounts of work. You can't take an infinite number of courses. So there are, in fact, trade-offs. I think what you try to do is give them certainly the fundamentals. They have to have an awareness, and they have to have skills. You know, they have to have mathematical skills. They have to have science skills. They have to have engineering skills as a foundation for what they're going to do in the future. And they need to have that engineering mindset, I would say, which really takes a while to develop through doing engineering problems and working through technical issues and technical parts of individual disciplines. But I think you also need to give them enough opportunities at least to awaken within their minds the fact that there are other things that T-shaped. You know, so you think of that T as a tree, for example, you know, kind of building on that metaphor. There are the roots in engineering fundamentals that they have to have, but there are also the fruits of other disciplines that are hanging from the tree. So you don't have to show them every piece of fruit on the tree, but you have to make them aware that they're there, and you have to give them enough experience with what those fruits are to be able to see the connections between the roots and the branches and the fruits that are hanging from the tree.
Dr. Desai or Arvind, any thoughts on this? This is an important
okay, so one example, I'd like to say something, if you permit me. I'll come to the T part in a minute. You know, one of the best institute, in my opinion, at higher level, which had what you call multidisciplinarity, was Bell Labs. We are forgetting it because, you know, in fact, if you look at it, I mean, I always claim everybody, at least, you know, is carrying a part of Bell Labs with them. Particularly if you have a cell phone, there is no way out of it. And if you know, there's a very interesting thing which I learned. If you look at the speech that Hamming gave, I think it's his retirement speech. And what he said in Bell Labs, what used to happen every day, he would go and sit with different people. So he would go and, you know, he's basically you call an electrical communication person. He would go with guys and have lunch with chemistry folks. Says, okay, you tell me what is an unsolved problem in chemistry. He says, next day I will go and have lunch with the physicist and ask them, hey, tell me what's the unsolved problem in physics. Okay, and I think, you know, that is what is required to create that multidisciplinarity. It is not simply structured programs. As a matter of fact, I am not a great fan of structured programs, and particularly today's youth is actually quite averse to structure, you know, and we keep imposing as professors as much structure as we want to. And as a side remark, you know, it is just incidental. We were on a temporary campus when IIT Hyderabad started, and there was a tree out there. You know, Keith talked about a tree, so it was nothing to do. Just because there was no other place to congregate, we had a small kind of a shanty kind of a coffee shop. But every faculty would congregate. Didn't matter whether it was electrical, mechanical, humanities, you know, economics, psychology. Now, when we moved to the permanent campus, after a year, everybody started telling me, Professor Desai, we are missing this. You know, this is where we used to meet, and we had really fun interacting. So I think the critical thing, I would say, even for Plaksha, is to make sure that you create this space where you're forced to congregate. Because if you don't, you will have cyber-physical systems where, as an electrical engineer, I will teach something, mechanical will teach something, you know, a person in computer science will teach something. It is truly, CPS is truly a multidisciplinarity. But unless you create these spaces, I've seen sort of department buildings. Way back, I went to a university in Australia. You know, I'm forgetting the name, Deakin. So Deakin was very proud of a particular department that they were building. You know, there were classrooms had no walls there. Everything was glass. Everybody could see everywhere. Okay, and I mean, I saw this building in some sense. It was kind of being constructed, and later on, I saw the video of it. And then again, I saw something similar at NTU in Singapore. The classrooms were not opaque. They were transparent to everybody walking by, as well as the students who were sitting there. Something totally contrary to what we had been doing in the past. Okay, so I think there is some message in it. One should think about it. Now, coming back to T, yes, I think this is a model. In fact, even in my presentation also, I always talk about, you know, breadth and depth. The issue is what compromise we, you know, what kind of adjust. This keeps changing. Whatever you do, the students will be happy and unhappy. If you have a lot of breadth and not depth, then they'll complain, sir, this is what we, and particularly in a system like IIT, which prides itself on depth. Okay, they are not, I mean, you know, what do you call it? I went deep into this and really understood it. Okay, so that's their kind of thinking. So this constantly keeps changing. What is breadth and depth? But yes, we need to focus on it. I think right now, I would say a bit of breadth is more important because way the technology is evolving, it is not as disciplinary based. In fact, if you permit me and give me a couple of extra minutes, if you go back to IIT Kanpur, this was designed with a consortium of some 7 or 10 American university involving Caltech, Purdue, Georgia Tech, MIT. MIT was the main champion. Okay, and the program they had, the first such program, I don't know about the US, but certainly in India, science-based engineering. So for a 5-year program, those days, 3 years were common. I mean, I took courses, as a mechanical. I was not great fan of mechanical. I was electrical, so I wanted to get that identity. I took courses in thermodynamics, mechanics, then workshops, lathe machines, the theory of lathe machine, theory of milling machine. Not just this, I took courses in chemical engineering, fluid dynamics, okay, which kind of on the border of chemical and mechanical. In fact, Arvind is at Purdue, the professor who taught me Ramki. I think he probably knows Ramki. Ramki was my teacher who taught me fluid dynamics at Kanpur. Okay, so the point is that, see, they designed it. Naturally, at the end of third year, if you ask me, and I could have actually, at the end of maybe fifth year, I could have actually taught a course in thermo. Of course, later on, I would never do that, but if somebody forced me, I said, okay, in a clutch, because I've learned it, I know about it, I can manage it. And not just me, I would say all of us went through it and nobody complained. So I think we need that. Now, that was 1960s. Okay, I think we can't replicate the same thing today. Things have to change dramatically. But yes, this is important, but this requires a major debate. And again, the same length and breadth need not be applied to every institution. Like Olin, you talked about, Bucknell. Things are a little different. Each one has a different measure. You go to Purdue, Purdue will have a different notion of length and breadth. Okay, I'm pretty sure. See, Purdue is a state university with a large student population. I don't know, it's 30,000-40,000 students or something total. Even engineering may be very huge. But if you go to even say Caltech, now Caltech will have a very different length and breadth model because it's a very small group. Okay, I graduated from Hopkins. Hopkins had probably, I think, the total population at that time on campus was 5,000 students. And engineering would be probably 1,500 or maybe less than that. So certainly length and breadth has to be, or breadth and depth has to be very different depending on where you are. I'll stop there. I think I took a lot of your time.
No. Arvind, your thoughts on the issue?
Yeah, Nitin. So focusing on this issue of how this actually gets implemented and the trade-offs between, core versus how do you do interdisciplinary sort of stuff. I wanted to maybe it might help providing an example to the audience here of how we do it here at Purdue Engineering. So, we have our traditional disciplines, and then we have a common first-year program, which tries to build a little bit of this interdisciplinary thinking. But really, we are able to build interdisciplinary thinking in through a parallel, vertically integrated stream. So, for example, EPICS is a program. I want to give you an example of engineering programs and community service. So EPICS is a award-winning program. It's won the same prize that Olin Engineering has won, which is the Gordon Prize from the National Academy. EPICS has won it too, and EPICS is now an IEEE program. It's run all around the world, including many institutions in India have EPICS as well. Yeah. Now, what happens in EPICS is starting from day one, you can, in your first year, start working on a project team. There's a whole variety of projects that are inspired really by community needs, real life projects, and so on. And the vertically integrated projects are those that are inspired by industry, right? But what happens is when you join that, you're going to be working with even senior students who have been working on the same topic over many years. So there's a lot of peer learning that happens here. It's all vertically integrated, right? So when you go up to your second year, then you're teaching students who are just coming in. So a lot of peer learning happens, a variety of projects. I want to give you an example of one such project. This has been running for the last 10 years. It is a series of projects actually with the Indiana School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Now what happens there is mathematics education. When you use Braille for mathematics education, it's quite a bit of a challenge because right now the main way for visually challenged students to learn mathematics is they use what's called a mechanical brailler, a Perkins brailler. There are some new versions of this that are electronic versions of it, but it's a mechanical device that allows just like you would take a piece of paper, right? We all will just take a piece of paper and write. That allows us to see what you're doing, make edits. What we do for visually impaired students is they use the Perkins brailler and they can see what they're writing. Oh, this was not right. It's the equivalent of making notes and scratching and stuff. Now, those of you who have been in the classroom and have taught, you know how important it is to observe what the students are working on to really get an insight into what needs to happen. I mean, you can just sit back and see what reports you get and edit them. But wouldn't it be amazing if a sighted teacher of visually impaired students is able to walk by, because all this is happening, the sheet is still in the typewriter, so people can't see what the students are working on. So the thing was, how do you make the relationship between a sighted teacher and a visually impaired student as they're working on math, doing the rough calculations? How do you make it alive so that a teacher can see and go, oh, that's great. Oh, hey, you missed that. Or, oh, that's fantastic. What a great idea. Those things that happen spontaneously in a regular classroom, suddenly in that context, in the life of a visually impaired student, those things are not available. Right, so they worked over years and they set up a beautiful system, which is, they have Hall effect sensors. So they integrate, so there's a mechanical integration piece. You take this typewriter, how do you integrate mechanically these sensors? How do you create a sensor display on the back end? And so they've provided this, and they've provided a standard way of doing this that schools around the nation can now use, because these Perkins braillers are being used all over, actually all over the world. But it's a brilliant piece because what it involved is these students, they go and work with these visually impaired students and really understand what is the needs of the teachers, the mathematics teachers. What are the needs? They're in the classroom, they understand the context. They build relationships with the customers. They understand the context. And the teachers involved in it are those who've got mathematics backgrounds, education backgrounds. So you got the disciplines that are informing it. You got the students themselves, the beneficiaries are both, they're involved in. Students, as you can imagine, have to be mechanical, have to be electrical, have to be computer science, they all sort of come together for this. And over the years, there's this body of shared understanding that's not lost because it's always cycling. Senior students, junior students, they're all coming in together. Industry loves students who have this experience because they know such students are going to step in, are going to be the people who figure out, hey, that's missing. That's what we don't have on the table. We need to do this to have a better solution. And it's the kind of mindset that Mark was talking about. So we built it through this vertically integrated stream. So we had to force a credit space into a regular education and make sure the students have it as they go through the 4 years of experience. So that's how we tried to build that into what might be a more traditional system. Over.
That's a fascinating example, Arvind. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm just reading some of the comments on the chat. Someone's mentioned that they are part of the EPICS program. So clearly this is resonating with people here. One of the things as students, maybe this is sort of the last topic we have time for, but just want to touch on it briefly. People are also thinking of outcomes when they go for education and engineering education. And I'm curious, in your experience, as we talk about this interdisciplinarity approach, for people that may be thinking of either jobs in industry or thinking about research and taking something and going really deep or solving a real world problem, or even entrepreneurship, what has your experience been with either employers or financiers or people on the other side as to their excitement or not for such approaches? Maybe we'll start with Keith, since you've done a lot of work around the entrepreneurship theme.
For sure. And I think to your question, I think people in industry and people who are looking for research students and entrepreneurs and innovators, I think there's a commonality of skills. One of the programs that I've been very much involved with is the KEEN program, Current Entrepreneurial Engineering Network, which really tries to instill within universities and then within the engineering students, an entrepreneurial mindset, which is not to say they want to be entrepreneurs, that they want to create entrepreneurs. They want to instill within them this idea that you need to always be thinking about how can you add value? What can you contribute to the process, to the product, to whatever that adds value, as opposed to just solving a narrow engineering problem. That came out of the experiences of the founder, Robert Curran, based on his industrial experiences. He found that engineers that he was hiring were often too narrow. They were thinking about how to solve a technical problem and not how to add value to the company. So I think that the response of industry has generally been good. There may be certain industries that just want a commodity engineer who knows how to run finite element programs or knows how to solve certain types of problems. But the ones that are really looking to add value, I think really appreciate what we're trying to do with today's engineering students. And even more so, I think the students who are, or the employees who are successful over the long term have those broader views. If you talk to people who rise up as managers and eventually CEOs of companies, they are certainly those people who had the broad mindset coming in and recognized how the different parts of their organization work together and had the skills, communication skills, the appreciation for psychology and philosophy and ethics and economics and everything else that made them successful. So I think it's appreciated in industry, and I think it's also appreciated in research. Obviously, research wants a greater depth of knowledge, but if every one of my research students came in the door saying, how can I add value to this project, I'd be pretty happy with that. So I think there is a broad base of this that's valuable in whatever careers the students choose in their future.
I think one of the things I'm hearing several of you talk about is that, you know, even around the breadth versus depth, it's more about the mindset really of saying, I'm not limited in my approach. I'm really trying to solve something. And if that means looking left, looking right, seeking help from this discipline or that, it's really adopting that mindset as much as it is about curriculum design or, you know, what you study. It's about sort of having this approach from the first day of saying, we're trying to solve something real. We're trying to solve something that requires inputs from a bunch of different things. And how do we make that happen? I think I'm being prompted to try and get this to closure. I mean, I think my sort of takeaway a little bit is that clearly this approach is something that is the need of the hour. Whether you think about solving grand challenges, whether you think about the needs of industry and research, it's not trivial to solve it, as you're all saying. It will take a lot of work around design, around culture, around making the structures of the place, even thinking of infrastructure of how you build your physical spaces, as Dr. Desai was saying, to encourage interaction. And in some ways that makes it really fascinating for us at Plaksha, because that's sort of the journey ahead. You know, the objective is clear, the task is difficult, and that should get all engineers excited. And that's sort of where we are. I want to thank the three of you for being here. This was fascinating. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And thanks for all the people that joined. I hope we gave you a little bit of a glimpse into this interesting future for engineering education, which is sort of more liberal in a sense in the way it interacts with different branches of it. Thanks, Arvind. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Dr. Desai. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Nitin.
Thank you.
Bye. You, Pallavi.
So much, Professor Raman, Professor Buffington, Professor Desai, for a really fascinating session. Some great examples and stories that really made this sort of education real for all of us. Nitin, thank you so much for being a great host and navigating a very passionate discussion to help us get some deep insights from this session. As always, a shout out to the audience for your very thoughtful questions through the session and all the engagement. We are now very happy to introduce the next session, which is on nurturing humane technologists. In this session, we have high school leaders who will discuss why we need technologists who care, who are empathetic, and how high schools can play a huge role in this. For this session, I'd like to introduce first Ganesh Kohli, who we think is the ideal host for this panel. Ganesh himself is a teacher and counselor who has founded, nurtured, and led education-focused organizations for the past 20 years. He has also simultaneously envisioned the IC3 movement, which now attracts leaders from 500 plus educational institutes to its annual conference and has 30 regional events across Asia. Plaksha and IC3 have a deep running partnership. Over to you, Ganesh, to introduce and commence this panel.
Thank you very much, Pallavi. And thank you very much for inviting me to do this. Thank you, Vineet and Kachi and the entire team. And well done to all of us who are still virtually alive. I mean, we are all virtually alive. We have to stay alive in this virtual world. We're going to make this as exciting for you as possible. So before I introduce my panelists, I just wanted to share an experiment that we're going to try doing today. I want you to keep a tab on how many times you pick up your phone in the next 40 minutes. Just make a little mark every time you pick up your phone, and let's kind of do this experiment and see. We're going to find out our relationship with technology a little bit and what it means to be humane technologists. So I would love for all of us to participate. We're actually going to open the chat box for this session, which means I'm going to also ask you to comment and ask questions to you as much as you ask us questions. So we really make this engaging and really have an exciting 40 minutes together. With that, I'm going to introduce three fabulous educators, and I'm going to invite them to switch on their cameras all together. Mrs. Avnita Beer, Dr. Amrita Vora, and Mrs. Seema Sapru. I'm going to introduce each one of them and just briefly read what I've got. I'm very bad at moderating, but somehow they've given me this task of moderating. So you have to bear all the imperfections. We live in an imperfect world, and all my imperfections with moderating, you're going to have to bear with. But we'll hopefully have a laugh or two along the way. So first and foremost, Mrs. Avnita Beer is the principal of R.N. Poddar School in Mumbai and has worked in the field of education for over 3.5 decades. She has served as a member of the governing body of CBSE, the leading education board of our country here in India. Mrs. Avnita Beer is the recipient of the prestigious National Award for Teachers in 2009, which was conferred to her by the Honorable President of India. She's also invited to Google to speak at Google's Global Education Symposium in Mountain View, California. She has been appointed as a member of their advisory board of Google's Global Edu Initiative. And she's a technology enthusiast and an ideal panelist for this session. She's passionate about integrating technology in education. And, I'm always a little scared of Avnita ma'am because, she was also my principal. I at some point taught at her school. So I always go and sit in front of her like I do, from my school days. Every time I see principals, I get nervous. And I've been put in front of 3 and I've been asked to question them. So that makes me extremely nervous. But I'm going to try to keep my composure here. Next, I'd want to introduce you to Dr. Amrita Vora. She, with over 25 years of transformative work in education, Dr. Vora is a passionate learner and educator, currently serving in a dual role as Director Education for GEMS Education India and Executive Principal for GEMS International School in Gurgaon. A PhD in English Literature and a Certified Program Leader for Cambridge Professional Development Qualifications for Teachers and School Leaders. She has been a faculty for undergraduate and postgraduate programs in Women's Studies, Literature, Women and Child Psychology, and Business Communication. And last but not the least, the funniest and the most humorous principal you can get in our land called India. And someone I've spent a lot of time with, including 2 weeks of travel in the US. Mrs. Seema Sapru holds a master's degree in chemistry and in education and a postgraduate diploma in school leadership management. She's done multiple courses, including those in multiple intelligence theory from Harvard and a global career counseling program from the University of California, Los Angeles. She has been teaching for close to 3 decades. She joined the Heritage School in Kolkata in 2007 and is on the advisory board of various educational organizations She's also a master trainer for chemistry appointed by the CISC, New Delhi. She has been awarded Principal of the Year, India by India Today and Educom. So with those introductions, I wanted to, invite all of us to chat, to comment. Let this not be a monologue. Let this be a dialogue. And remember, I hope you got your pen and paper and you're marking out how many times you're lifting your phone, because we really want to do an experiment here and see how many times we touch that device, which is supposed to be a slave of ours. But the question I really want to ask you is, are we a slave of that phone, or is the phone using us, or are we using the phone? Because really, you might just as we speak be getting a very important notification from Facebook that a friend of yours has gone for a holiday during COVID times, or you might get a notification from Twitter. So really, who's calling the shots in our life is a question that we want to answer. And I also want to share a context why this is so important. Humane technologists, Plaksha is pioneering a lot of pieces in tech education, and having known Vineet and some of the founders at Plaksha, they're really thinking through this deeply. And this session that we are going through today is not an accident. We came from a time when zamindars, landowners were the most powerful people on the planet. And we then evolved into a time when steel owners, through the Industrial Revolution and all of that period, those who had control over the steel industry were powerful. But today, the most powerful people in the world are the ones that have data. And they literally run our lives. They rule the planet. We like it or not, that's the reality. And the reason we need to discuss humane technologists is because there's excessive power with data today. Someone knows where you are right now, what you eat, when you eat, where you go, how you travel. Someone knows so much about us that even we don't know about ourselves. And we're sitting in front of a screen on the other side of which are millions of computers that are learning every day, every moment from what we are doing, and they're governing our lives. There's this fabulous documentary that I'd encourage all of you to watch called The Social Dilemma. And there's a Harvard professor who's talked about, how companies now, technology companies are trading in human futures. We aren't using technology. They're actually shaping what we do, who we elect as a president or a prime minister, what we do in our lives, what we eat. So really, we are being run in many ways by technology. And therefore, this conversation is so much more important. We could learn physics and make a nuclear bomb, or we could learn computer science and manipulate people and make them do some crazy things. So the human element with technologists is so important today. And I'm going to really invite our audience to ask questions. Some of my questions here is, have we become a pawn in the hands of technology that we created unconsciously, obviously? Are we only teaching coding and physics in school, and have we forgotten to talk about the human elements of what this technology can do? Is tech meant to solve problems or control people? That's another question that we all are looking for answers for. So I'm going to begin this discussion with a question for each of my panelists. And my first question really is, tech can be viewed as an exciting medium to solve problems and or a quick way to make money. It's insane the number of 23-year-old millionaires we have today. They're all tech millionaires, right? They've sold their app, they've done something. So how are your students, and if I can ask this question to Seema, how are your students viewing tech? How do you as a school leader inculcate the value of balance with their career path between making that money, going out and doing everything possible, and solving some of those real problems that we need to solve with technology. Seema?
Yeah, so Ganesh, can you hear me? Am I audible? Yeah. So, see, I would say that if you talk about technology, it's basically, if I talk in terms of today, I think it's neither that powerful nor that flexible to have an approach where, means and the end result are both ethical. And that is what we have to teach our children, that end doesn't justify the means. Now, if there is surveillance going on for people, adults, children, everybody, to find out and how to change their behavior by, maybe positive reinforcement or by intermittent, certain things are added to their phones. So if that is what is going to happen, I don't think children will have that balance. So I think surveillance, which is very, very unethical, that has to be, children have to be made aware of that. And they have to be told that they have to be prepared for the unknown and discover human virtues. And that's how they keep a balance.
Thank you. Avneeta ma'am, if I can ask you, is technology really the devil here? What is this about? I mean, is technology changing the way we are behaving? How scary is this? I mean, there's a lot of, as I was reading in preparation for this session, 90% of the stuff I read was like, oh my goodness, be scared of these technologists and they're going to, change our world, etc. What's your take? And you've been a principal who's really adopted technology. You brought it in every aspect of your school. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Ganesh. And, I have always very proudly said that I'm a technology enthusiast, of course, not a technology expert. And I've encouraged technology, and I look at technology as a big savior. And it has been in the last 6 months, if you ask me, in the pandemic period where, technology was our savior. It was our go-to. It ensured that there was no learning gap for our children. So having said that, I'm a practitioner and a pragmatic practitioner. But in the last few days, I did go through, especially prepping up for this, panel. I did read, I watched the film, I watched the documentary, and then I read up a lot. I heard Tristan Harris, I heard Yuval Harari. I also tried to get a balanced opinion by listening to Stephen Perkin, and try to see what makes some sense out of this. And honestly, if you ask me, from an enthusiast, I've become a little bit worried about it's as if the apocalyptic vision that Tristan is has painted for us, especially in the area of social media and how it has impacting us. So I have started to question a little bit. Yes. So I think I'm going to be a more as an educator myself. I'm going to be a much more aware, a more enlightened user of technology. And I would say that children today, in fact, I would say they are more discerning. For us, our generation, it's novel. It's the uses far outweighed the disadvantages or the fears that we have about technology, especially in the last few months that we've seen in the field of education. But I would say that so children are discerning, and I'm not worried about the youth. Youth is asking questions, and I think as educators, that's our role. To make them question, to make them critical thinkers, and to question what developments are happening in the area of technology. So I would say that it has tilted for me in favor of a little bit more of a caution, from being a total enthusiast. I would also go on to share that every time I had a panel or a talk to give on any subject, and I would call it serendipitous that I would get a notification, a recommendation from YouTube or on my social feed, something that gave me some idea on the same topic, and I would say, this is so amazing. I'm reading up on this topic, and somebody has actually posted something on my social media, on my feed, and I would be very thrilled with that. And today, when I'm analyzing it, I'm thinking, okay, there's a bigger machine at play. So the machine definitely knows us better than we know ourselves, and that's a little bit of a scare. Yes.
Dr. Vora, would you share some of those sentiments? Should we be afraid? And and we'll come back to we'll come to the humane technology pieces. And even as you answer that question, I'd love our audience to kind of share what technology means to them. Maybe one word. If you can just post one word in the chat box, what does technology mean to you? Just one word, not a phrase or a sentence, etc. And please keep adding a 1 to your count when you pick up the phone every time. I want to see how many times you pick up the phone in the 40 minutes. But Dr. Vora, over to you. You're mute. Yes.
Yeah. So somebody in the chat box just wrote, you asked for one word, and somebody wrote enabler. Well, yes, we all have looked at technology as an enabler, as a tool. But one thing that I have always said, we were earlier talking about the information age, and actually now it's an infodemic. It's a demon out there also at the same time, which needs to be tamed. It will be an enabler if we use it as a tool, if we tame it. So we need to tame it, and it will not be an enabler. The personalization will bring in polarization and everything else that, yes, all these different channels and medias that we have been looking at are talking about. Anybody, anything that can be converted into an algorithm will not be a job for human beings. It already isn't, and that's only going to grow. We can't keep ourselves away from technology. We can't shy away from it. We have to use it. We have to tame it. And this generation, as my colleague said, that children are more discerning. Children are already questioning things and realizing things. What is scary is that, yes, there is a polar, everybody has a different news. Your news and my news is no longer the same. What you see and I see are two different things. And that is what may change all of us and pull us apart a lot. So what is really needed, and what we've been doing essentially in all our schools across, is this bringing back of the emotional aspect, the empathy aspect, the resilience, which is so needed. The children today are in a world of instant gratification. We need resilience more than anything else. We need to really work on teaching them that. Children have been naturally resilient, but this whole tech environment around is taking it away to a great extent. So that we need to work on consciously in the school systems, at home. And the same technology can become an enabler in multiple ways, like it has during the pandemic for all of us. Imagine the world without it. How would it have panned? But actually, here we are. So, and here we are, children are doing virtual conferences, not just with people in the same city. The virtual conferences, the globe has really opened up to them. So that is the wider perspective itself is an answer to this whole personalization. While that may personalize, but when our children actually get the wider perspective, get to see things in different contexts and discuss and actually do some deep listening, I think that is the answer to this problem.
Well, it's fascinating that you use the word listening, you use the word empathy, and that really brings me to the next area really of discussion here. Essentially what we're saying is, and I can see all these comments, wonderful, Geetika and Kaustup, and there are so many people commenting, Ketan, Sharat, thank you, Tanuja, all our friends in the audience are talking about the uses of technology and how it's so important. So it really boils down then on how we as humans use it. And that's where, the empathy bit, the balance bit all comes in. Now, as you are preparing, we all know that the journey of life starts in school. And as you are preparing students through the years in school, you are also preparing the technology leaders of the future. Can you actually teach them empathy? Can you bring that into the curriculum? Can you bring a mindfulness, a sense of balance, get purpose and direction on? And would that therefore then enable technology leaders of the future to be that much more sensitive? So my question is, can empathy, mindfulness, balance, these perspectives be taught in school? And I'd like each one of you to take maybe a minute or so to answer this question, because this is a really important question for all our educator friends. Avneeta ma'am, you want to go first, and then Seema ma'am?
Yeah, I'll go first.
Okay.
So I think, empathy, mindfulness, deep conversations, critical thinking, all of these are an important piece that has to play a very important role in schools, even as we integrate technology in our classrooms. As we enter into a world which maybe I would say it's a transition phase where we are seeing maybe a temporary disequilibrium, where maybe we're getting worried about the dangers of addiction and the other dangers of technology. I feel that we will reach a new higher equilibrium as the natural evolution process takes place. And like in any other innovation that we see, there may be a temporary disequilibrium, an imbalance, but checks and balances will get put in place. So as an educator, as a school, I think a very important piece would be life skills, would be mindfulness, would be empathy. And I agree, I definitely feel that these can be taught if we consciously assign time and place for these to be nurtured in our children. So I remember that we were an Ashoka Changemaker school, and one of the premises on which they selected schools to be an Ashoka Changemaker school was that, does the school build empathy? Is there a culture of empathy in the institution? Until then, we were practicing maybe empathy, but we had never kind of really voiced the word. We had not articulated, the language. So I think semantics do matter. So we started to talk a lot about empathy. We set up, an initiative called Drishtikon, where we were bringing a lot of broad content to our children, discussing multiple perspectives, different viewpoints. So that children are not so they have an open landscape to think from. And the humans of Podar, where we started to address issues like bullying in school, or cyberbullying. So issues such as these have to be discussed. They have to be brought forward. It has to be, like Amrita said, it cannot be brushed under the carpet. We need to be in the world of our children in order to be able to help them. So if technology is an important part of their lives, and it is ubiquitous today, so we cannot shy away from technology. We cannot run away from. We can't close our eyes and say we're not going to look at technology, because that's not our place to do so. We have to enter into our children's world and handhold them and guide them through this. And I think life skills, empathy, mindfulness, all of these will play a very, very important role, and consciously done.
In creating those human technologists, it's so important that we don't just teach physics, chemistry, and math and let these kids out, because they could use a lot of that in different ways. Seema, you want to share your perspective? Are you able to do this in your school? You're probably already producing human technologists. So
Absolutely, Ganesh. Thank you so much. And I must tell you that this is something that we are that's very close to my heart. And what we do is, first thing is, the entire school believes in being empathetic towards each other, everyone. And then we continuously tell everybody, we are all learners here. Nobody is a teacher here. From the principal to the peon, everybody learns. And, holding doors for people or letting people pass by in front of you, being kind, being helpful comes with the learning at school. The fact that we have something called Sambhavna Divas, where everyone, the I shouldn't be calling them fourth class staff or whatever, the helpers, all our helpers, they sit and all of us, children and teachers, we cook for them and we help them, we serve them food twice a year. That we do. Plus, what we do is we have our, sports day. In the sports day, we have these, our helpers being with us, and they also have their own race with us. Thirdly, we have ours inclusive school. So the fact that you walk into a school and you find there are so many children who are wheelchair bound, and nobody even looks at them as if there's something different because they're a part of the school. So if somebody is helping him, hold the hand and pulling him up in the lift. There's another one who's taking him to the dining hall. There's another one who has the duty. So these children share with each other, and it's like it, and they observe everything. I don't know what is happening at home, but we also train our parents. So it's not just the children, because ours is not a boarding school, it's a day boarding school. But what happens at home, children have to learn that whatever is happening in school, that has to be replicated at home as well. So we keep talking to parents as well. And I think children observe and learn. So that's something we really, really take pride in. I'll be very happy with our children.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. I want to slightly tweak this question for Dr. Vora. What would, we've got educators in this audience. We've got school principals in this audience. We are sitting on a Friday evening. We've had a long day. We're kind of doing this last bit here. What can we really change? Because on what can we change in our schools? What should we be doing to make sure that on Monday morning, and I'd love for each one of us to have one idea that you can share. What can we do on Monday morning? What can we take back from this session that will actually bring, humanity to technology? These words seem to be so far away from each other, that can bring humanity or purpose with technology. So, Dr. Vora, your thoughts on one thing we can all do on Monday?
Yes, so we can do a lot of things, but just to add to that, something that we already do, and I'm sure everybody can, educators here can replicate any ideas they like. So to build in empathy, which is what we were essentially discussing, and how to bring in that human element to everything essentially we do. Whatever be the subject, whether we are teaching physics, chemistry, mathematics, English, whatever, in every lesson plan, we integrate something called global citizenship, and we integrate peace ideas, and we integrate something that we call, not we call, but sustainable development goals. Which goal does this connect with? And children understand each idea, each concept that they're learning. While learning, they explore it from the perspective of a local context, or my community context, or my own personal life context. They also understand it then from the perspective of my country and a larger context, and then at least some different country global context. So each idea takes on a different dimension, and they have to do this in, of course, collaborative breakout groups and so on and so forth. It really, when you understand things in different contexts and you identify with the ideas of others and the scenario, then you're genuinely, what you're doing is empathy essentially, and you're every day doing it with everything. So that becomes a habit, and it cannot be learnt any other way. It cannot be ingrained or built any other way. It is part of you. Same with emotional intelligence in a lot of things, and mindfulness then is also important. We're talking about learning how to learn, or we're talking about metacognition, or thinking how I think, thinking about thinking, and knowing what and how am I thinking. How exactly is my mind working, and how is it really capturing this idea and that idea, and what's working for me, what's not. The minute we make children think like that, or inwardly reflect a lot, it does develop mindfulness more and more. Gone are the days when you could say that, we have to teach children problem solving, yes, of course, but we also need to teach children now to identify the problem. What is the problem? To understand and then to define the problem. So the very idea of thinking design starts with empathy and defining the problem. So that is something that needs to be part of everything we do. When children grow up with all this, they certainly will be more humane in terms of what kind of technologies they design. They need to have everything learned through a research base, genuine research, because you can't rely on. They need to know that, okay, if I'm getting something on internet XYZ channel, it's not something that's necessarily true. So I need to find and I want to dig out another perspective. One of the things that Avnita said in this conversation, that she read the discussion shared, and just to ensure that she was not one-sided, she also went ahead and checked out another point of view. That's very key. Now, that if we are able to create in our children as a habit, I think that's when we make those humane technologists for tomorrow.
Great. Well, thank you. And there are lots of questions coming through. I'm going to have each question be taken up just by one of the panelists, and you can self-govern and volunteer to take some of these questions. How suitable is the form of online learning to the skills and interests of an individual learner? How is this new world working out for individual learners? What are you seeing? How suitable is this approach?
It's different for different children. It cannot be one thing is perfect for everyone. Everybody's circumstances are different, and how they are being able to, what kind of access to technology they have is also varied, and therefore it's different. And what kind of pedagogy the teachers are implementing, even that is varied. So we can't say one fixed answer to this, but yes, it has phenomenal advantages. The kind of exposure that children are getting, if it is managed well, it is amazing, and children are really enjoying it. Human beings evolve, and so must education, and children are already way more evolved than the educators here. As we all are learners, therefore we are all learners, and we have to continue to be that. And I think that's where the idea is that we need to keep making it more and more suitable for each one. Reach out to each one's specific challenge and make it happen. Technology does come in handy in a lot of ways for that.
I just like to add, Ganesh, that definitely personalization has become easier using technology. The one size does not fit all. That has been, it's kind of reinforced, and it's also been possible that we have different models and different solutions for different age groups, for different types of learners. So I think personalization and customization has happened with the use of technology. Definitely it has helped in the online mode. Particularly we've been able to reach out to individual students much more, because I think what has happened is it's meant the death of distance, the death of time, because suddenly our reach has increased many-fold times. So we're able to do much more with and more effectively and more efficiently with technology. So it's been an enabler in that sense.
And that kind of, I'm going to move a little bit away from where we are at this moment. And since we are talking about humane technologists, and how do you actually bridge the gap between humanities and technology? Where is that intersection in school? Please go ahead, Avneeta.
Yeah, so, I was, somebody mentioned that, Amazon is hiring a lot of people from the humanities, background, whether it's psychology or sociology, philosophy. So, because artificial intelligence will require a lot of humanities. I just feel that it will give a much broader spectrum of views and beliefs and values that will come into technology you're looking at it in a broad sense. When you're looking at an integrated approach to solutions, right? So it's not just science, it's not just physics, it's not just mathematics, it's philosophy, it is ethics, it's sociology, it's politics, it's psychology. All of these play a very, very important role in technology, in the development of technology. So I'm sure that, the gap between humanities and technology is not there. It's not there. It's actually an integrated approach that will be used, because you need to understand the human mind from different aspects, from different perspectives.
Seema, are you already doing something to bridge this gap between humanities and technology in school? And I know that we come through a system where we are boxed very early. I mean, for the most part, unless, we've been used to, we knew that we could do PCM or PCB for most of our generation, physics, chemistry, math, or physics, chemistry, biology.
Yes.
So the reality is we've been boxing our students. An engineer only becomes an engineer. He learns everything about engineering, and, he knows how to do everything around physics and, some of the engineering stuff. But he doesn't learn anything about, sociology or psychology, or, how to exist with other human beings. And, so what are we doing at this moment, Seema, in schools to actually bridge this gap and come out of these boxes and kind of bring these pieces together?
See, Ganesh, I'm very happy you asked me this question, because we had this very, very brilliant teacher called Sandeep Malik. Now, he is doing his PhD in Kathak dance, and he teaches geometry. So he's doing his PhD wherein he's talking about geometry used in Kathak dance. So this is what he's teaching our children. So that's one thing. Secondly, we have a brilliant mathematics.
Your sound, Seema, your microphone doesn't seem. Yeah, it's kind of breaking in and out.
Yeah, so what has happened is, I am right now on the outskirts of Calcutta in a very in a remote area in a guest house. So
we are losing you, but it was very.
I hope.
Yeah, I think we got a point.
Can you hear me now?
I'll repeat. A geometry teacher who's also has a PhD, you said, in Kathak.
A Kathak dance teacher who's teaching geometry with Kathak, because he's doing his PhD in Kathak, and he's talking about the relationship between mathematics and the dance. So this is dance and mathematics. So he's talking about that. Plus, we have a brilliant mathematics teacher in our school who teaches mathematics with football, how parabola is made, and how much distance and the weight and whatever. So he's so passionate about football, and children love him. So there are a lot of things that are happening in the school. So where we, as Avneeta had mentioned earlier, so there are certain names that we don't give to anything that we're studying about. So it's only later on when somebody tells us, okay, you're doing this interdisciplinary thing. Well, wow, this is great. So we didn't know that we were doing it, because this is how we plan our lessons. So this is absolutely brilliant. We love it. And so that's how we're doing it. It's not just this, but for every other language also, whether it's English or Hindi or history and science. So we are doing that together. We're doing geography together with mathematics. So there are hundreds of other things, and chemistry, of course, my subject. I'm doing it with lots of other subjects as well. So it's good fun. It's so much fun to be able to teach various subjects. This interdisciplinary thing that we're talking about. So that happens in all schools as of today, I think.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing those perspectives. I know we are getting close to the end of our session, And I just want to go back to our audience and see how many times people picked up their phone in this last 40 minutes. We really want to know, what is the master-slave equation? Are you a slave of the technology that you use, or are you the master of that technology? So please, 23 times. I love this. Let's look at 0 times. There are some very meditative people here. And 4 times, 2 to 3 times, 5 times, Sharad says, 10 times, Lakshmi. I love this. 83 times I touched mobile phone. How do you calculate this? I mean, I'm now curious. I believe that there is, technology has solutions for all the problems it creates also. I believe there is, Avneeta ma'am was sharing with me earlier today, that there's some technology that's coming up. She's in the US right now, where if you pick up the phone, it has a count on how many times you picked up your phone. I think we've got screen time already that you can track. But really, that really brings me to the conclusion of this session. And what we're seeing is that, and what we're hearing from all of you is that technology has no purpose of its own. It really is human choices. It's choices that we make. Like somebody made a choice of picking the phone up 23 times, maybe unconsciously, and someone made a choice of not picking it up for these 40 minutes. Our attention spans have shrunk, and a lot of it is, blamed on technology. We used to sit down quietly for 4 hours. We can't sit down quietly for 40 seconds anymore. And so while we may blame technology for a lot of these pieces, it's really personal choices that humans make. I think we are in a world of what we are seeing is persuasive technology. Many of you talked about it. We are all living in our own bubbles. And what schools can do really to create humane technologists is to get children to come out of these bubbles and to be able to educate them around the perils of technology. At the same time, get them to fully leverage the benefits of technology. And we clearly are, up against, this world where extreme power today resides with technology companies. And it's our prerogative as educators, and I've heard this from all of you, to bring that empathy, that mindfulness, that awareness, that consciousness. The only way we can beat machines is through our thinking brain, which is 40% of our brain. And schools really need to use the opportunity to do that. So machines are always going to memorize better than us, repeat better than us, follow rigid instructions better than us. But we've got, the ability to create, to problem solve, and to think. And so really, our work as educators is to allow for the neocortex or the thinking brain, the frontal lobe to work, and for students to become conscious of how they are consuming technology, how they are consuming all that's around them. I want to express my gratitude to each of our panelists. Thank you for being so special and for doing this. I also want to say thank you to this phenomenal team at Plaksha. I want to particularly mention Sanath. He helped prepare us for this session so well. This is such a wonderful group of humble, simple people. Natasha, Nina, all these wonderful people, Nani. And thank you, Vineet, for your leadership, and Kachi. So we are grateful for this opportunity. We hope that you've all taken something back. Please keep your phone away for the next session if you touched it any more than 5 times. In the interest of our next speaker, we surrender our phone and become a master of the technology that we have at our disposal. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you, Sachi. Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful being here today.
So much, Amrita ma'am, Avneeta ma'am, and Seema ma'am, for a very, very insightful session and sharing amazing stories and perspectives from what you've done in your schools. Thank you so much for making the time and joining us here today. It was really our honor. And thank you, Ganesh, so much for being a great host, as always. It was completely expected, and you totally raised the energy level of the audience to match yours. And that's really a very high standard. So thank you so much for doing that and helping people keep away their phones. I hope they will carry that on for the rest of the conference as well. Thank you, Ganesh. Okay, so before we open the next session, which all of you have been waiting for, we'd like to have a poll here for the audience. You will shortly see a question on your screen. The question is, what is the average attention span for us humans? And there are 4 options here: 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 120 minutes, 12 hours. You have 30 seconds to put in your answer. Engaging by the responses so far, we can tell that there are a lot of high school students in the audience. All right, here we go. So 10 minutes has 51% of the audience said 10 minutes and 44% said 20 minutes. I hope the educators are still here and watching this. This is a data point we really must capture. So I should share that this question actually has a scientific response. It has a scientific answer. And if you want to know what that is, make it a point to ask that question to the next keynote speaker who's coming up. And with that, I'm very, very excited to introduce the next session. It's called Grasp, the Science of Learning. In this session, you can expect to get some path-breaking insights on what the future of learning looks like from one of the best minds in the world and one of the global experts on this topic. First, introducing our host, Dr. Manas Fuloria. Manas has PhD and BTech degrees from IIT Delhi and MSc degree from Stanford University, and he's also worked as a researcher with the Harvard Business School. Manas went on to be a co-founder of Nagarro, which is a software development and technology consulting firm, and now plays the CEO role over there. He is a co-founder and trustee of the upcoming Plaksha University as well, and is himself very passionate about the topic of rethinking learning. Over to you, Manas, to begin the session and introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Sanjay Sarma.
Thank you, Pallavi. I think it's customary to say that it's an honor for me to introduce so-and-so, but never have these words been truer than today. You're always introducing entrepreneurs or political people or different kinds of people, but the person I'm introducing today is someone I really respect. I think his work has been at the intersection of 2 things that Plaksha is really serious about: the working of education with industry, and then innovating around how you educate as well. So Sanjay is a professor at MIT, and he's one of the foremost thinkers in the space of RFID and consequently IoT, and helped create some of the standards, industry standards around RFID, which is really cool in itself. And then he went on to become the first director of digital education at MIT and the first dean of digital education at MIT. And he was co-chair of a task force for the future of education at MIT. And it doesn't get any cooler than that. And as a result of what the committee came up with, or the task force came up with, MIT decided to invest a lot more in trying to chart the future of education, not just for higher learning, but all the way from pre-KG, higher education, and all the way through to lifelong learning. So Sanjay is now the VP of Open Learning at MIT. He's won several awards. I won't list them, including the NSF, National Science Foundation's Career Award. He's also the author of a book called Grasp, and I would really recommend that you read it. He's literally calling on all of us and telling us that the emperor has no clothes, if you will, that the current way that we teach our children probably is not the right way, and exhorting us to choose a much more effective but revolutionary way. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you very much, Manas. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you about this exciting opportunity that lies before us, created by a fundamental new understanding of both education and the brain, and also the tragedy that is COVID has sort of forced us into a new world. So what I'm going to talk about today is about some topics from cognitive science that question what we know about how we should educate, and some of the many dogmas and misunderstandings that have held us back. So, our education system is surprisingly old. And imagine if your doctor depended entirely on stuff that was known 100 years ago and nothing new. I mean, imagine where we would be with COVID if our doctor didn't know biochemistry or didn't understand how equipment like ECMOs or ventilators worked, um, or if our doctor didn't understand how steroids work. Now, our challenge is that that is sort of where education is. So let me tell you, first of all, how old our education system is. It goes back about 1,000 years. And in fact, the first universities go back about 2,500, 2,600 years to places like Takshashila, which is now in modern day Pakistan, and Nalanda in Bihar, and other universities, the old Hindu and Buddhist universities. And then that was lost. And then the Islamic universities like Al-Qarawiyyin in Morocco, Al-Azhar, and then the Oxfords, Bologna's, going back about 1,000 years. And most of them were actually, at some level, monastic. So the basic idea is that, pardon me, I need to get my morning stimulant here. Most of it is based on learning the holy book, whether it's in Hinduism or in Buddhism, whether in Christianity or Islam. And the concept of the degree comes from permission. So you gave another scholar the permission to teach what you learned about the holy book. In fact, the original word for the degree was ijazas. So then the British and European universities, Oxford, Bologna, they start, and they continue along, and then the Industrial Revolution strikes. When the Industrial Revolution happens, two things. One is you want to educate young students to prepare them for the factories, but also when you have working parents, you have to do something with their children. So there's also a childcare sort of functionality. And so those two streams converge. So we take the monastic approach and we take the factory approach, and that's our modern education system today. And it worked really well for the British because they came to India and they wanted to prepare Indians to become clerks and become workers in the British Empire, which we very happily became, notwithstanding the extraordinary genius of many Indians who both excelled in science, but also decided not to buy into that and participated in the independence movement. But it's sort of tragic to me that here we are, in 2020, and we're looking back, and without changing what we learned, we follow it with rules and regulations that have not changed. This is in schools and this is in higher ed. The fundamental challenge and the fundamental misunderstanding with the factory model of education is this. It is the assumption that the professor has a pen and the student's brain is a sheet of paper. And all the professor has to do is write on the student's brain and declare victory. And if the student doesn't pay attention, you can go to the student and say, you didn't pay attention, and try and make them feel bad so they actually pay attention. That's not how the science tells us the brain works. How do we know this? We've studied the brain over the last 100 years. It started with someone called Ramon y Cajal. He was the man who generated the first drawings of neurons and really was visionary in figuring out how the brain works and how synapses are formed. The brain is not a sheet of paper for the professor to write on. The brain is a growing body, a growing organism. Actually, ironically, it doesn't grow, it prunes by changing the connections between the neurons. And it formulates a model of the world. You should think of it more like a plant growing. You can't give a plant water when you want to give it water. You have to give the plant water when it wants water. You can't give it potassium or fertilizer when you want to give it potassium or fertilizer. Imagine if you took a plant and you gave it a lifelong supply of water on the first day and said, okay, you're set for life. It doesn't work that way. There's evaporation, the plant needs to draw water from the ground. Potassium is at the right time, nitrogen has to come at the right time. In fact, that field is called precision agriculture. Similarly, the human brain is trying to formulate a model of the world, and this model requires taking chunks of information, digesting them, organizing them, and that cycle is 10 minutes. So after 10 minutes, when professors keep talking like I'm doing now, the student is sort of loses it. In fact, what happens after the 10-15 minute chunk is the student goes into a different mode, which is they start becoming familiar with the material, but they're not learning it. And that's actually worse, because false familiarity breeds an illusion of learning. You're better off realizing you don't know it than to think you've learned it and not learn it. Now, when the brain is forming an image of something, when it's trying to figure out, let's say you teach multiplication and the brain's trying to figure out how is it similar to addition, how is it different? After 10 minutes, it has to sort it out. When it sorts stuff out, it tends to remember things at different paces and actually tends to forget something. So for example, when I learned just a couple of days ago, I was reading about GIS systems, which basically cartography and mapping. And within a day or two, I've forgotten some of the concepts. Now, is it because I wasn't paying attention? No, it's because when the brain absorbed that material, it retained different aspects of it at different levels and forgot some stuff which is low-level detail. When forgetting occurs in the education system today, we tend to have this impression that somehow the student is at fault. But let me just tell you that forgetting turns out to be a fundamental step towards learning. In other words, when you forget, what's happening is the strength of the synaptic connections in the brain. In the first time you learn something, the synaptic connections are made with something called a neurotransmitter, which is it's a chemical connection between the synapses, and that's how the memory forms. But when you start forgetting stuff, the neurotransmitter, think of it as it sort of evaporates and it vanishes. So the second time you remind someone, and the third time, the brain says, oh my God, the neurotransmitter isn't good enough. I need to drop yet another synapse. And so there's a physical change in the way the brain forms memory. That's called long-term potentiation. Well, that's one of the mechanisms of long-term potentiation. So it turns out forgetting is actually a good thing. But the key instinct of the teacher should be to remember when a student is forgetting, not make them feel bad about it, but use that as an opportunity to remind them. That results in longer-term memory. And it goes on and on. I mean, for example, we know now, not just in learning intellectual topics, but also in things like sports, that you're better off in what is called interleaving, which is you're better off doing one thing and then another thing and then come back to the first thing. So if you're doing, let's say in intellectual, let's say you're teaching math. So let's say you're teaching exponentiation and logarithms, right? You might think, let's do a bunch of exponent problems, and then let's do a bunch of log problems. Actually, you're better off doing exponent, log. And the reason is the brain is really terrific when it notices differences. Now, and the learning is not doing the exponent, but it is recalling how to do exponents. So when you switch, you're forcing the brain to load a different program. And that's where the learning occurs. Now, the tragedy right now in COVID is such a strange situation. You have almost 1.5 billion students, actually more than 1.5 billion students, who were separated from their educational institution during the spring of this year, March, April, May. And so what did teachers do? They went straight to Zoom and they did their lectures on Zoom. Now, the problem with that is Zoom captures the worst of both worlds. So first of all, we took our regular lectures where we applied none of the tricks I applied, that I described, and we just put it on Zoom. And second, the only saving grace of the traditional regular lecture is that at least students have some peer pressure. There's another student, and they sort of, if you don't understand something, you could say, teacher ne kya kaha, you can sort of ask. Of course, there's distraction also, but that peer pressure is very important. And at least the student can be seen by the teacher, and the teacher can interact with the student. You can have some fun. You can change the topic. That's also gone. So we're in the worst of both worlds. In the future, when we go back to regular classrooms, had better not be the Zoom lecture recreated in the classroom. What a waste that'll be. You know, the luxury of being together, which I wish I could do. I wish I could visit India. I wish I could visit my family. That luxury is a very special luxury. And we took it for granted, you know, we squandered it. When we were doing together, we should be talking to each other, not just one person talking, but we squandered it. Instead, one person just talks like we do on Zoom. When we have it back together, let's not recreate what we could have done on Zoom. You know, for all its problems, at least Zoom has advantages. It's convenient. It's better for climate change because you're not getting on a plane or a car or a bus and going somewhere. Let's do a lot better. So what can you do that's better? Now, first of all, one thing you cannot do better in person is one-way lecturing. And the future, in my view, is not Zoom lectures, but asynchronous lectures. And what I mean by that is the professors recording lectures in advance. Now let's think about that. Imagine if you could have Einstein give a lecture in physics. Now, I teach dynamics, which is a field of physics. I think Einstein could give a much more inspiring lecture than me, and I'm pretty good. I would rather have Einstein give the lecture. So should the professor even be recording the lecture? Or are we better off using lectures that were highly produced by someone who's really good at it and really has good production quality and has thought about it? I actually think it's the latter. So the future is we will use video lectures. Most of them will come from someone else. Unfortunately, Einstein did not record too many lectures. There are a few. But imagine if Eric Lander, who was at Harvard and MIT, who sequenced the human genome, could give a course on genetics. That's going to be better than anything most professors at MIT can produce. So let's use that lecture. You send the student to that lecture. And all these tricks I described, like make the lecture short, you can do that online. You can do that in person. Looking for forgetting, actually you can do that online. You can actually measure if someone's forgetting and remind them. Interleaving, which is, switching between topics. Very hard to do that in a regular lecture. You lose the classroom, but much easier to do online. So push all the lecturing online. And when we are together, just imagine if you haven't seen your parents in some time or your children in some time, you're back together. Are you going to talk to each other? Or are you just going to sit down and lecture them? Well, that's the same thing with the classroom. When we're back together, we should be doing a few things. One of the things we know from neuroscience is that, and in fact, we know from evolution, is the human being is a learning animal. We form our we are the most immature animals at age 20, right? Most animals by age 1 are basically adults. And the reason is the human being has to learn because we're very adaptable. And Dr. Amrita Vora posts there exactly, it's flipped learning, flipped classrooms, right? But a much more multidimensional flip. So how do we, how do we initiate learning? It turns out the way to initiate learning, and there's actually a term for it in English, is curiosity. And we can show that when you make a student curious, the student's brain activates something called the dopaminergic circuit. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's very central to learning. So other neurotransmitters, the serotonin, dopamine, melanin, et cetera, but dopamine is very central to learning. So once you activate the dopamine circuit, which is what you do when you can only do in person, right? You can do it, actually you can do that online as well, but you can even do it even better in person. You can go on a field trip, you can go to a factory, you can go to a museum, you can go to a library, you can go to nature, and you can say, what's happening there? Why is that happening? Generate that. That's so much better done in person. Once you do that, let the students go off in flipped classroom mode and go read, go watch videos from Khan Academy, from other sources, and look for content. They will drink it up. By the way, just as when you're hungry, the mouth will generate saliva. When you're intellectually hungry, it's curious. the brain generates dopamine. So think of dopamine as the saliva of learning. Once the brain is in that mode, send them to Khan Academy and students will gobble it up. Let them gobble it up. And when they come back again in the classroom, focus entirely on playful, creative projects. Let them do homeworks in the classroom and then coach them. Let them do projects in the classroom and then coach them. So that is the flipped classroom. Now, the problem with the flipped classroom is a lot of people think, oh, I'll just have students watch stuff online and come back and everything will be fine. Nope. You have to set it up. You have to give the students context and curiosity. And when you do that, you create something called intrinsic motivation. Once intrinsic motivation is generated, then students will consume the content. And the content has to come in short bites, like 10-minute videos. You can do very complex things with 10-minute videos. The other day, I was trying to remind myself of a fairly advanced field in mathematics called tensors. And it was, a few hours of videos, all 10 minutes. I watched it. It's fantastic. I was curious. I'm an adult. There's a reason I was curious about it. I had forgotten it. Forgetting is important. And so when I refreshed, I remembered it so much better. For students, you need to give them context and curiosity, and then let them go absorb this material. And then when they come back, when you have the luxury of being with them, celebrate it, right? For every problem they do at home, you should be working a problem with them in the classroom. You should be telling them, Naiveta, not like this. Think of it this way. Okay. Oh, your mental model. Or maybe think of it this other way. It's almost like psychoanalysis. You should be working with them, as I said, on projects, field trips, etc. Make the classroom absolutely something that students would love to be in. I want to maybe close with an example. In this great country I live in, the United States, I had the great luxury, by the way, of growing up in one great country, which is India, and living in another great country. One of the things about the United States is the diversity here. So my daughter, when she was in high school, her Spanish teacher was actually a Vietnamese American, Senor Tran. Now, by the time he was teaching systems like Khan Academy, all the online stuff on YouTube, by the time she was taking the class, were everywhere. And there was a particular software program called Quizlet, which was actually founded by an MIT dropout. It's a flashcard-based learning thing. Beautiful, beautiful system. So she and all her classmates, what they would do is, by the time they enter the classroom, they'd already learned the Spanish. They would watch it on YouTube. They would practice on Quizlet. They would talk to each other on Google Hangouts. They would talk about it. And you know what they did in the classroom? Fascinating. Not in one class did Senor Tran have them work on Spanish grammar. Like recitation, never. In every class, he would make them write and act out skits and plays. And in the context with coaching, he would say, no, that's gender. You got the gender wrong. You got to change that. You got the grammar wrong. Maybe that's the wrong word. Use this word, but in a very constructive way. But what the students were actually doing was writing and playing out little drama, and the kids would absolutely look forward to these classes. It was fascinating. I mean, this was their most popular class. Senor Tran eventually won an award, a national award for Spanish. So I'm going to stop there and just say that, I like to joke and say that the 21st century begins next year, 2021, because everything is changing this year. A lot of it is for the bad, unfortunately. A lot of people are out of work, economy, of course, COVID has caused devastation. We've lost loved ones, etc. But 2021 is an opportunity for renewal. And in education, such a fundamental industry, such a fundamental human necessity. For God's sake, let's start new and different and make this absolutely a glorious 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjay. And we have some questions coming in now. And the first question that I'll take is one that's also close to my heart. It's about 10-minute videos. And I've also been totally flabbergasted over the last years with my kids and how much they love these 10-minute videos and how much can be crammed into them. So the question is, how can a complex concept be explained in just 10 minutes? And maybe you might want to use some of the examples that we had talked about earlier, because I think people need to go and watch them themselves to understand this. But that's the question.
Thank you, Manas. As a PhD yourself, you know that we all take really complex concepts. We all learn them, but the great challenge is breaking them down into little pieces, and that's actually as great an intellectual challenge as building the complex challenge, a complex concept in the first place. The fact is, those complex concepts came out of small incremental inventions and breakthroughs. So it's not like someone suddenly figured out, Einstein didn't suddenly figure out general relativity one day, right? He had lots of little tidbits.
Palavi, I think we lost your audio.
Can you hear me? Yeah. If you take the great teachers, the Feynmans of the world, the even Einstein, the Carl Sagans of the world, not only were they profound thinkers, but they were able to reconstruct profound thinking in small chunks. So if you look at Feynman's lectures, which are for me a Bible, I have 2 copies of them, right? Or if you take, for example, Claude Shannon's papers, the profundity is in it's that amazing ability to construct the complex concept from small bite-sized chunks that we can all understand. The Taj Mahal is built out of bricks and pieces of marble, right? We can absolutely do it. And I think this is the failure. With a 40-minute lecture, lets you get away with a you don't have to break things down.
Yeah, and I also find it fascinating that if you watch videos that trace the history of evolution of a concept, because that's how it happened with step after step, it's both interesting as a story and interesting to parse it, right? You have to sort of turn off that thing in your head that everything that you are hearing is correct, because sometimes you find out halfway through that it had to be adapted and or had to be ditched. But I think it's again this it becomes bite size again if you tell the history, right? So
I completely, in fact, you hit, by the way, if I may, you hit a nerve in a wonderful way for me. We tend to start with lemmas and theorems and expect the students to understand it. That's nonsense. Because even the great mathematicians, Poincaré, Bernoulli, the great physicists, did not arrive at those concepts suddenly in whole cloth. They were human beings. They struggled. If you read Poincaré, he says, I was trying to figure out what happens if you draw a circle on a sheet of rubber. Rubber had just been discovered, right? You stretch it, what happens? So it humanizes it. But somehow we presented theorem first, which is so ridiculous. So this breaking down into bite-sized chunks is stunning. It's called we actually look down. How sad is this? We look down on spoon feeding, but we know as parents, all of us, spoon feed our children, right?
Yeah.
So let's put some joy into spoon feeding. It's okay.
I also, I think with the last time we spoke, I was telling you that my kids will be really excited that you know the people behind Veritasium or Physics Girl. It is Physics Girl, right? Physics Girl and the others.
Physics Girl,
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe you can introduce the audience to some of these channels, because I think they are really, really cool.
Yeah. I've taught at MIT for 25 years, quarter century. And, I think I'm a good lecturer, but I'm telling you, these guys put me to shame. So go to YouTube, right, and search for Physics Girl. She's an MIT alumna, actually. Or search for 3 Blue, 1 Brown. It's a channel started by a Stanford grad, Grant Sanderson, who then worked at Khan Academy. By the way, it's called 3 Blue, 1 Brown. It's playful because his eyes are blue, except one quarter of one eye is brown. That's why I called it 3 Blue, 1 Brown, right? Or half of one eye. So, or look at Veritasium, or look at Crash Course Physics, right? Or look at Weihart. What these people do is, I think they've actually invented a new profession. And the profession is explication. That's actually, as you know, an English word, but taking explication and turning it into an art form. How do I make something fun and interesting and bite-sized, but I'm actually not losing the profundity? For example, Three Blue, One Brown recently had a video on something called, on quantum mechanics, basically, right? It's quantum mechanics and polarization. I'm just telling you, I wish I had come up with that video. So let's just take a hat off to these people and say, oh my God, you nailed it. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the future, right? And I couldn't do better than that. So I'm happy to send my students to look at that and then turn the classroom into a discussion. By the way, lecturing, some people do it really well and some people have really thought it through. Coaching is a democratic skill. We can all be great coaches because we're all parents and we were all children.
Yeah, we have a lot of teachers in the audience, and a lot of these are these people, and actually we at Plaksha as well, we are thinking about how do we make this work, right? So I think it's at two levels. As an individual, how do you make it work? And this requires also some assets, etc., that you might need to use, like videos, for example. And then as an institution, how do you make it work, right? So what kind of design, what kind of culture, what kind of departments or offices? Because not everyone is an MIT with a whole lot to invest in these different specializations around digital learning, etc. So how do you see a typical school or university adopting this?
It's very interesting, Manas. I've thought a lot about it. I mean, the first comes with, rolling up your sleeves, right? So the professor has to, first of all, think of themselves not as some godly figure, but just another human being trying to convey to a human being, how to think about something. So a few years ago, I was visiting, one of my colleagues was in Singapore at a university we were building, and I was looking for him. I just landed in Singapore, and I was looking for him. I didn't find him. And so finally someone said, oh, Professor, the professor is there. So I couldn't see. And then I finally looked. He was underneath the machine tool, fixing the machine tool. I just saw his feet. That's why I didn't notice him, right? Roll up your sleeves and get to work. So there's a culture of that. By the way, at MIT, I have even my 17-year-old students call me Sanjay. And if they call me dude, right, I am very proud. If they high-five me, I'm proud. Because this is not about hierarchy. I want them to respect me, not because I'm a professor. I want to respect them, and I want them to respect me for what we are. It's got to be mutual. It's got to be sincere. It cannot be hierarchy. So it starts there, right? But it also, there's something I think a little bit self-affirming about standing on a lecture hall. That's good. We should do that too. But really sort of imposing a hierarchy and say, I know this and you don't. But to be able to, like a parent, suppress one's ego and help the other person grow, right? That is a mindset. And creating an environment, a structure, encouraging that, creating the workshops, the labs, even the classroom, the shape of the classroom, the way the desks are organized to encourage that, whether it's a round table, whether you're teaching the students, giving them agency or making them feel judged. These are the questions that I think a good institution will and should answer.
I love the part about hierarchy. I think that hierarchy just kills this, or this sort of overbearing stuffiness of hierarchy just kills this. It's just incompatible, perhaps, with hierarchy. It's a really good point. I mean, I think that every institution should have that at the top of its list, and I'm pushing for the same at Plaksha, right, to have a non-hierarchical sort of structure.
Hierarchy, Manas, is often a defense of the insecure.
Yeah. Totally. One question, that people you said people have very short attention spans. Do you think it's a product of our times, or is this something that is sort of wired into us? And the second follow-on question is that should we be working on increasing these attention spans? And especially if you're doing research, for example, is that basically by increasing his attention spans?
Yeah. So first of all, that there's a part A and a part B. Part A is when you absorb something. Part B is when you do something. Okay, they're different things. When you're absorbing, 10 minutes is what we should not try and exceed 10 minutes, but we should shoot for 8 to 10 minutes, maybe even between 7 and 10. The problem is we used to shoot for 1 hour, right? In IIT, that's or MIT, or all the schools I've been, it was 1 hour, which is actually scientifically not right. So, and then we would make students guilty for not concentrating for 1 hour. But 6 to 10 minutes is actually sensible. It should not be 1 minute. And I think that's where the cell phone, the distraction, it's not so much lack of attention span. It is the addiction to distraction, right? It's like, imagine you're trying to maintain a diet and you're addicted to the ritual of taking a snack, right? So I think we should shoot for about between 6 and 10 minutes. For that 6 and 10 minutes, yeah, people must pay attention, but we should not expect 30 minutes. That's input. Part B is output. When people are doing something, that is not when they're absorbing, but they're doing something what they know. There is a mode. It was reported by the scientist Mihaly. His name is Csikszentmihalyi. His first name is also Mihaly. His last name is Csikszentmihalyi. He's a Hungarian psychologist, and he wrote a book called Flow, Flow, Flow. And you can go hours. And actually, a lot of young people have that, right? When they play a game, they're playing for hours. That's actually flow. But if you get them excited about building a project or doing art, they can go hours. And that's a different type of attention span. But we shouldn't confuse the two.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. One of the great things that you just said was about curiosity being the saliva of the brain. I just love that phrase. Then our job is to, as educators, is to create that saliva, if you will, right? Bhavika asks, what are the ways to generate curiosity in the virtual world? So how do you get students to feel curious in the virtual world?
It's actually not that easy because we are social animals. It is not that easy, but you can do it. And so for example, let's say you're teaching dynamics, right? Which is a, vibration or something. One thing you can say to students is find everything before the class, in your home that is vibrating, right? Like there's a fan rotating, the fan frame is vibrating, right? The car goes by, the table vibrates. You can see the water oscillating right there. So when you come to the classroom, right, you can say, report all the kinds of vibration you saw. And someone might say, when I speak, when there's a noise outside, the window vibrates, right? So you have to find these little tricks, and it's very unique to the class, to the texture of the class, the content, to the people, etc. So it's not easy, but in a classroom, you can be much more structured about it. And you can use props,
Right. I'm just following the questions as well, right? So someone asks that, Dr. Shanti asks that, do you think that the teaching should be standardized? The teaching approach should be standardized, or in an institution? And I know you have views on that. That's why I picked the question, at least on the workflows and stuff, right? But so, or is there room for creativity?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for creativity. And in some ways, in the United States, by the way, every classroom, every teacher makes up their own lesson plan. That to me is wasteful. In fact, it kills creativity, right? So I think there's a middle ground, which is what you do is you standardize things like, listen, if you're teaching, I don't know, biology, here are the half a dozen lectures that broadly cover a curriculum, use those on YouTube, right? Make sure they watch this, and this, or this, that, and that. But in the classroom, you see the actual, if you do coaching, if you're doing, if you're trying to make people curious, it's actually it's very exciting for the students and the teachers to be very creative, And then the other thing I recommend is teachers talk to each other and recommend to each other what worked for them, and each has to personalize to their personality and to their own interest. Teachers' interest should come shining through. So there's a lot of opportunity for creativity, but strangely, the creativity comes from standardizing on the other side, which is if you say half a dozen video lectures, you make the room for the creativity. But we do neither right now.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We just have time for one last question, and this question is, how do you motivate yourself, or how do you get yourselves charged up for this work that you're doing, and what are your goals? What would be sweet success for you?
I think, Manas, in some ways, I have to say that I apply very similar principles to the one I espouse, right? I think I like to remain curious. I'm very lucky. I have friends and family who are similar. This morning in my IIT Kanpur WhatsApp group, classmates, there were half a dozen. There were, every week there's a puzzle posed or some interesting fact, and we talk to each other. Yesterday, I spoke to one of my classmates, as a professor at Johns Hopkins. So I'm very lucky in that respect. But the most important thing to me is I try and stay curious. And when I'm curious about something, I just gobble up stuff, What I'm hoping is, as we enter the 21st century, which is next year, as I said, more and more of our students will have to become the CEOs of their own lives. So what I'm hoping is we stop treating them like passive sheets of paper that we can write on, and rather like self-efficacious agents of their own life, the CEOs of their own lives. If we can do that, there's no stopping these wonderful, amazing minds from achieving extraordinary things.
Well, that's all we have time for. Sanjay, thanks a ton. It's very inspiring to hear you speak. We have been inspired at Plaksha, and a lot of what you said is also true, by the way, just for organizations in general. So it totally resonates. You want to build great organizations, you want to build great educational institutions. You have to sort of move towards this modern way of thinking about individuals. We are not, building the pyramids or something where you need 10,000 slaves and so on, right? The tools we have today are so powerful that each individual can do such a lot. And we haven't just even tapped that. We haven't even touched that. So thank you very much, Sanjay, and for everything. Thanks.
Great to see
you. Thank you so much, Professor Sarma, for a really mind-blowing talk, as always. And every time I hear you talk about the 10-minute attention span, I understand it and I start to wonder at the same time, because it's when you're talking, then we're just completely glued on and lose track of time. Thank you so much. It was really an honor to have you on our platform.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Manas. Thank you for being the perfect host for this session and making the discussion even richer because of your own passion on the topic. Thanks a lot for your time. And finally, a big shout out to our entire audience, all the educators, high school students, college students, professionals, everybody else who took the time out to join us today. Thank you for being a really fantastic audience. Thank you for all your comments, all your questions, all your engagement. That's really what makes the session worthwhile. We really hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Same place, different time. Tomorrow's track is called Tinker, Create, Solve. If you identify as a tinkerer, problem solver, dreamer, creator, or innovator, I'm sure you will absolutely love it. The session starts at 10 a.m. IST. You will receive a calendar invite with the Zoom link shortly. See you there. Have a wonderful evening.